Hello friends, did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The smell hit me first, tang of blood that you'd expect at a crime scene. But something else entirely sweet, almost floral, like jasmine mixed with something I couldn't quite place, something organic and decay adjacent that made my stomach turn even as it drew me in. After 15 years with the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit, working cases from the Atlanta child murders to the cross-country killer, I thought I'd encountered every variation of death signature scent. I was wrong. It was March 15th, 2019, when I got the call that would consume the next 18 months of my life and fundamentally change how I viewed the monsters we hunt. I was reviewing case files in my corner office at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, surrounded by the familiar chaos of crime scene photographs, behavioral analysis reports, and the ever-present coffee cups that kept me functional during 16-hour workdays. The spring rain was pattering against my window, and I was deep in concentration, working on a consulting case for the Denver field office involving a suspected family annihilator when my secure line buzzed. The caller ID showed Detective Ray Gonzalez from the Portland Police Bureau, a good cop I'd worked with on the Oregon Strangler case 3 years prior. Ray was old-school law enforcement, the kind of detective who'd earned his stripes working the streets before moving into homicide. He was methodical, thorough, and most importantly, he knew when a case was beyond the scope of local law enforcement capabilities. Agent Mitchell, we've got something here that, well, I think you need to see this personally. The tremor in Ray's voice caught my attention immediately. This was a man who'd worked homicide for over 20 years, someone who'd processed scenes involving dismemberment, sexual torture, and ritualistic killings. He'd seen gang executions, domestic violence murders that would make seasoned agents vomit, and drug-related killings that defied comprehension. For him to sound shaken meant we were dealing with something extraordinary. What are we looking at, Ray? 3 victims. So far, all discovered within a 12-mile radius of downtown Portland. Young women, mid-20s, similar physical characteristics. Long dark hair, petite build, university students or recent graduates. The victimology fits a clear pattern. But Sarah, it's not just how they died, it's what he did to them afterward. I could hear him take a deep breath over the phone, collecting himself in the way that experienced investigators do when they're about to describe something that's fundamentally disturbed their world view. Each victim was found in what can only be described as a cocoon, not metaphorically, literally wrapped in silk-like material suspended from trees in remote locations. And there are modifications to the bodies that suggest our unsub has extensive knowledge of entomology. The crime scene texts are calling it the most sophisticated post-mortem presentation they've ever encountered. Entomology, the study of insects. In my experience, serial killers with specialized scientific knowledge were among the most dangerous and the most difficult to catch. They combined the methodical thinking of academics with the twisted psychology of predators, creating a perfect storm of intelligence and malevolence that often kept them ahead of law enforcement for years. How long between kills? I asked, already mentally cataloging what I knew about organized serial offenders. First victim, Jessica Chen, disappeared February 18th, found February 23rd. Second victim, Amy Rodriguez, disappeared March 1st, found March 5th. Third victim, Patricia Williams, disappeared March 8th, found this morning. He's accelerating, Sarah. The cooling off period is shrinking. That was never a good sign. Accelerating serial killers were either building towards some kind of endgame or losing control of their compulsions. Either scenario meant more bodies were coming in soon. I'm catching the next flight out, I told Ray. Don't let anyone else contaminate the scenes until I get there. And Ray set up a joint task force briefing for tomorrow morning. We're going to need representatives from the Oregon State Police, Portland PD, and probably the U.S. Forest Service if these scenes are on federal land. Already done. I had a feeling you'd want to take point on this one. 6 hours later, I was standing in the Tualatin Hills Nature Park, a 222-acre preserve on the western edge of Portland's metro area staring up at what would haunt my dreams for months to come. The late afternoon Pacific Northwest light filtered through the canopy of old-growth Douglas firs, creating an almost cathedral-like atmosphere that should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like standing in a monument to human depravity, suspended 15 ft above the ground, wrapped in what appeared to be genuine silk cocoon material that caught the fading light like spun gold, was the earthly remains of Patricia Williams, a 25-year-old graduate student pursuing her master's degree in environmental science at Portland State University. She had been a teaching assistant, well-liked by her students, engaged to her college sweetheart. She had plans, dreams, a future that had been snuffed out by a monster, with an obsession I was only beginning to understand. The crime scene technicians had already documented everything with their usual methodical precision. Photographs from every conceivable angle, measurements, soil samples, trace evidence collection. But seeing it in person sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the Pacific Northwest's perpetual drizzle. The cocoon was a work of art, if art could be fundamentally evil. It was perfectly constructed, symmetrical, with what appeared to be actual butterfly wings incorporated into the silk matrix in intricate patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't part of a murder scene. How did you find her? I asked Officer Martinez, the young patrol cop who'd been first on scene. He still looked green around the gills, and I could see his hands shaking slightly as he checked his notebook. Jogger called it in around 6:15 a.m. Mrs. Henderson lives about 2 miles from here, does this loop every morning before work. At first, she thought it was some kind of art installation, you know, like those environmental art pieces they sometimes put up in parks. Then she saw the hair. Long black hair hung down from the bottom of the cocoon, swaying gently in the morning breeze. It was the only part of Patricia Williams that was visible, and somehow that made it more disturbing than if the entire body had been exposed. There was something profoundly unsettling about that single human element, emerging from what looked like a work of twisted craftsmanship. When was she reported missing? 4 days ago, March 8th. Last seen leaving the Environmental Sciences building at PSU around 11:30 p.m. Security footage shows her walking to her car in the campus parking garage, but that's where the trail goes cold. Her car was found the next morning in the garage, locked. No signs of struggle. Keys were missing. I pulled out my secure satellite phone and called my team back at Quantico. Spencer, I need everything you can find on entomology experts in the Pacific Northwest. Focus on anyone with access to large quantities of silk material. Lepidopterists, museum curators, university professors, private collectors. Cross-reference with any history of violent crime, mental health issues, or disciplinary actions. Also, I need you to run a VICAP search for any similar cases nationwide. Victims found in cocoons, insect-related signatures, anything involving metamorphosis symbolism. While technical analyst Spencer Reed worked his magic with the FBI's databases, I examined the scene more closely. The killer had chosen this location with the same care an artist might select a gallery space. The tree was isolated enough to provide privacy during the hanging process, but visible from the main trail system that wound through the park. He wanted his work to be found, but not immediately. This suggested someone familiar with the area, possibly a local, definitely someone who'd scouted the location in advance. I walked a wider perimeter around the tree, looking for any trace evidence the initial crime scene team might have missed. Serial killers, especially organized ones like this appeared to be, often left subtle signatures that spoke to their psychology. 30 ft from the tree, partially hidden under a fallen log, I found something that made my blood run cold. Detective Gonzalez, I need you to see this. Ray jogged over, careful not to disturb the established crime scene perimeter. I pointed to what I'd found. A small wooden box about the size of a jewelry case, carved with intricate butterfly motifs. Inside, nestled in black velvet, were 3 items that told a story I was only beginning to understand. The first was a butterfly wing, real, perfectly preserved, from what looked like a monarch butterfly. The second was a lock of dark hair tied with a small ribbon. The third was a Polaroid photograph of a young woman I didn't recognize, but who fit the physical profile of our known victims. "He's been planning this for a while," I said, bagging the evidence. "This isn't impulse killing. This is a carefully orchestrated campaign. Detective Gonzalez, I need to see the other 2 crime scenes." Now, over the next several hours, we visited the locations where Jessica Chen and Amy Rodriguez had been discovered. The first scene was in Powell Mountain Park, a 612-acre natural area southeast of Portland. Jessica had been found suspended from a massive cedar tree in a secluded grove, wrapped in the same type of silk cocoon, positioned to catch the morning light in a way that created an almost ethereal effect. The second scene was in the Mount Tabor Natural Area, another Portland Park System location. Amy Rodriguez had been discovered hanging from an oak tree near the park's defunct reservoir. Her cocoon decorated with the wings of what appeared to be hundreds of different butterfly species, creating a mosaic of colors that was simultaneously beautiful and horrifying. The pattern was consistent. Young women, physically similar, all wrapped in silk cocoons and suspended from trees in public parks. Each victim had been missing for 3 to 5 days before discovery. Each location was carefully selected for maximum visual impact. This wasn't just about killing. It was about display, about transformation, about turning murder into what the killer perceived as art. But it was the autopsies that revealed the true horror of what we were dealing with. Dr. Emma Hartley, the Multnomah County medical examiner, had been doing this job for longer than I'd been with the FBI. She was a small, precise woman with steel-gray hair, and the kind of steady hands that came from decades of cutting into the dead to speak for them. Nothing rattled her. She'd processed victims of plane crashes, building collapses, and every conceivable form of human violence. But when she walked me through her findings in the sterile environment of the county morgue, I could see the strain in her eyes. "All 3 victims show evidence of paralytic poisoning," she began, pulling up X-rays on her computer screen. The images showed skeletal structures that looked normal at first glance, but closer examination revealed tiny puncture wounds along the spinal column. The substance used appears to be a synthetic version of a compound found in certain butterfly larvae, specifically the larvae of Batysaur, the pipevine swallowtail. It would have rendered them conscious but completely unable to move. How long would this paralysis last? Based on the concentrations we found in tissue samples, anywhere from 48 to 72 hours, during which time she paused, clearly struggling with the next part, during which time the killer performed what can only be described as a metamorphosis simulation. The autopsy photos were unlike anything I'd seen in 15 years of chasing monsters. Each victim showed evidence of careful, precise surgical work performed while they were alive but paralyzed. The killer had made dozens of small incisions along each victim's back, inserting what appeared to be wing-like structures made from actual butterfly wings. Hundreds of them, carefully arranged and somehow fused to the tissue using what appeared to be a biological adhesive. "Jesus Christ," I whispered despite my usual professional composure. "There's more." Stomach contents show the victims were fed a liquid diet for days, something resembling the protein soup that caterpillars consume during their pupation process. The compound is complex, containing amino acids, sugars, and what appears to be liquefied butterfly wings. And there are traces of silk proteins in their hair and under their fingernails, suggesting they were gradually wrapped in the cocoon material while still alive and conscious. Dr. Hartley pulled up additional photos showing the victims' faces. Each had been painted with what appeared to be natural pigments in patterns that mimicked butterfly wing markings. The attention to detail was extraordinary and deeply disturbing. The cause of death in all 3 cases was ultimately asphyxiation, but it was a slow process. The cocoon material was designed to gradually constrict as it dried, essentially squeezing the life out of them over a period of hours. They would have been fully aware of what was happening. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about killing. It was about transformation, about the killer's twisted obsession with turning human beings into something else entirely. The psychological profile was becoming clearer. We were dealing with someone who saw death not as an ending, but as a transition into what he perceived as a more perfect state of being. Back at the Portland field office, a glass and steel building that housed the FBI's Oregon operations, I spread crime scene photos across a conference table and began building the profile. The room was sterile, all fluorescent lights and government-issue furniture, but it provided the kind of focused environment I needed to get inside a killer's head. This unsub was highly organized, methodical, and possessed extensive knowledge of lepidopterology, the study of butterflies and moths. The cocoon construction alone would require weeks of preparation for each victim. He was patient, disciplined, and had access to sophisticated equipment and materials. The biological adhesives, the paralytic compounds, the silk material, none of these were items you could pick up at a local craft store. My phone rang, interrupting my analysis. It was Spencer Reed from our technical analysis unit at Quantico. "Sarah, I've got something. There's a guy named Dr. Marcus Webb, former entomology professor at Oregon State University. He was dismissed 3 years ago following allegations of inappropriate conduct with female students. No criminal charges were filed, but there were multiple complaints about him requiring students to participate in what he called metamorphosis experiments that made them extremely uncomfortable." What kind of experiments? According to the university's internal investigation files, Webb was having students simulate insect transformation processes as part of their coursework. Students reported being asked to remain motionless for hours while covered in various substances, being photographed in cocoon-like wrappings, and being subjected to what they described as psychological conditioning related to accepting death as a form of rebirth. Where is he now? That's the interesting part. His last known address was a cabin in the Mount Hood National Forest, about 40 minutes from where the first victim was found. Property records show he purchased it with cash shortly after his dismissal from the university. But here's what's really got my attention. Webb published several papers on synthetic paralytic compounds derived from butterfly larvae. His research was focused on developing humane methods for specimen preservation in field studies. He's exactly the kind of expert who could pull off these murders. Send me everything you have on him. Publications, employment history, financial records, vehicle registrations, utilities, phone records, and Spencer. I need surveillance on that cabin. If Webb is our guy, he's probably already selected his next victim. The next 12 hours were a blur of activity. Our Portland task force had grown to include agents from the FBI's evidence response team, behavioral analysts from Quantico, and specialists from the Bureau's laboratory services. We established a command post in the Portland field office with direct communication links to the FBI's Strategic Information and Operations Center, the headquarters. The surveillance team reported that Webb's cabin showed signs of recent activity. Smoke from the chimney, vehicle tracks in the driveway, lights visible at night. But something was off. The thermal imaging suggested there might be more people at the location than expected, and the electromagnetic signature indicated sophisticated electronic equipment that seemed inconsistent with a simple mountain retreat. While we planned our approach to the cabin, Reed continued his deep dive into Webb's background. What he found painted a picture of a brilliant mind that had gradually descended into obsession and madness. Dr. Marcus Webb had been a rising star in the field of entomology. His doctoral dissertation at UC Berkeley had broken new ground in understanding the biochemical processes that governed insect metamorphosis. He'd published over 30 peer-reviewed papers, been awarded significant research grants from the National Science Foundation, and been recruited by Oregon State University with the promise of his own research laboratory and a fast track to tenure. But Webb's research had gradually shifted from legitimate scientific inquiry to something much darker. His later papers dealt with applying metamorphosis principles to other organisms, including mammals. He'd written extensively about the limitations of human consciousness and the potential for using paralytic compounds to induce transformative experiences in human subjects. The complaints against Webb at the university had started small. Students reporting that he made them uncomfortable, that his teaching methods were unconventional, that he seemed overly interested in their personal lives. But the complaints had escalated. Female students reported that Webb had required them to participate in immersive research experiences that involved being restrained, photographed, and subjected to what could only be described as psychological torture, disguised as academic experimentation. The university had tried to handle the situation quietly, offering Webb early retirement and a generous severance package in exchange for his resignation. But Webb had refused, forcing them to go through formal dismissal proceedings. During the hearing, Webb had delivered a rambling 40-minute speech about the evolutionary necessity of human transformation and the beauty of death as rebirth. The hearing officers had been so disturbed by his presentation that they'd recommended psychological evaluation, but Webb had disappeared before it could be conducted. As we prepared for the operation at Webb's cabin, I received a call that changed everything. "Agent Mitchell, this is Detective Susan Chen with the Vancouver Police Department. I think we have one of your victims." My heart sank. Vancouver was just across the Columbia River from Portland, well within the geographical area where our killer was operating. "What do you have, Detective?" "Female, mid-20s, Asian American, fits the physical profile you circulated, but she's not dead. She's alive and she's asking for the FBI." 20 minutes later, I was racing across the interstate bridge toward Vancouver, Washington, with Detective Gonzalez and 2 tactical agents from our evidence response team. The call from Detective Chen had been brief but chilling. They had a woman matching our victim profile who claimed to have escaped from the Butterfly Man and was demanding to speak to federal agents. Vancouver's Peace Health Southwest Medical Center was a sprawling complex of modern buildings surrounded by the kind of carefully maintained landscaping that was supposed to project calm and healing. Instead, as I hurried through the emergency department, it felt like another crime scene waiting to happen. Detective Susan Chen met us at the elevator. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with the kind of alert eyes that missed nothing, and the grim expression she wore told me that whatever we were about to see was going to be bad. The victim's name is Lisa Park, 24 years old, graduate student at Washington State University. She was found this morning walking along Highway 14, about 15 mi east of here. Motorist called it in when he saw her stumbling along the shoulder, partially clothed, covered in what appeared to be some kind of silk material. Is she coherent? Physically, she's in surprisingly good condition considering what she says happened to her. Dehydrated, some superficial cuts and bruises, but no major injuries. Psychologically, well, you'll see. She's been asking for the FBI since she was brought in, specifically asking for someone who understands the butterflies. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor where the hospital had set up a secure area for Lisa's protection. The hallway was guarded by 2 unformed officers, and I could see additional security measures that suggested they were taking no chances with her safety. Lisa Park was sitting up in her hospital bed, wrapped in a standard-issue hospital gown, but what struck me immediately was her eyes. They had the thousand-y stare I'd seen in combat veterans and trauma survivors, the look of someone who'd seen something that fundamentally changed their understanding of the world. "Miss Park, I'm Special Agent Sarah Mitchell with the FBI. I understand you wanted to speak with us." She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether I could be trusted with what she was about to reveal. "You're investigating the Butterfly murders." She said it wasn't a question. "Yes, can you tell us what happened to you?" What Lisa Park told us over the next 2 hours was the most detailed first-hand account of a serial killer's methodology I'd ever encountered. Her story filled in crucial gaps in our understanding of Webb's operation and revealed the true scope of his twisted obsession. Lisa had been abducted 6 days earlier, while leaving the Washington State University Library, where she worked as a research assistant. She remembered walking to her car in the parking structure, then waking up in complete darkness, unable to move but fully conscious. "I was in some kind of container," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was warm and humid, like being inside a chrysalis. I could hear him moving around outside, talking to himself, but I couldn't respond. I couldn't even blink. The paralytic compound Webb had used was more sophisticated than Dr. Hartley had initially realized. It didn't just immobilize victims. It heightened their other senses, while leaving them completely helpless. Lisa described hearing every sound with supernatural clarity, smelling every chemical web used in his preparation process, feeling every touch as he began his grotesque transformation ritual. He called it the becoming, Lisa continued. He said I was chosen because I had the right proportions, the right coloring. He kept saying I was going to be beautiful, that I was going to transcend my human limitations. Webb had kept Lisa in what she described as a preparation chamber, a specially constructed room that maintained precise temperature and humidity levels. He'd fed her the same protein soup we'd found in the other victims' stomachs, administered regular doses of the paralytic compound, and gradually covered her body with silk material that he claimed was grown specifically for her transformation. "How did you escape?" I asked. "I didn't. He let me go." The room fell silent. This wasn't part of any serial killer pattern I'd studied. Organized offenders didn't release victims, especially not victims who could identify them and describe their methods. 2 days ago, something changed. He was agitated, pacing around the room, talking about the collection being incomplete and not having enough time. He kept checking his computer, making phone calls. Then yesterday morning, he came in and injected me with something different. The paralysis started wearing off gradually. Lisa described Webb as becoming increasingly erratic as the hours passed. He'd alternate between treating her with the kind of gentle care one might show a valuable specimen and violent outbursts, where he'd scream about interference and people who didn't understand the work. Finally, he just opened the container and told me to leave. He said the collection was moving to a more suitable location and that I was no longer viable for the final transformation. He gave me some clothes and drove me to the highway. The last thing he said was, "Tell them the butterflies are flying home." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Webb wasn't just releasing Lisa, he was sending us a message. This was either a final taunt before he disappeared, or he was escalating to some kind of endgame we hadn't anticipated. "Lisa, I need you to think carefully. Did you see any other people at this location? Hear any voices besides Webb's?" There were others. I couldn't see them, but I could hear voices, footsteps. At least 2 other men, maybe more. They called Webb Doctor and seemed to be helping him with the work. This changed everything. We weren't dealing with a lone serial killer. We were looking at an organized group with a shared obsession. The implications were staggering. I called Spencer Reed from the hospital hallway. "Spencer, I need you to expand your search parameters. We're looking at multiple suspects, possibly an organized group with academic or scientific backgrounds. Cross-reference any associates of Webb's from his university days, research collaborators, former students who might share his interests." "I'm already on it, Sarah. I found something else you need to know. Webb's financial records show large cash payments over the past year from a source I can't identify. Someone has been funding his research, and they have serious money behind them." As I hung up the phone, Detective Chen approached with a grim expression. "Agent Mitchell, we have a problem. Lisa Park isn't the only one. We just got a call from Oregon State Police. They found another survivor." The Oregon State Police had found Michael Chen, no relation to victim Jessica Chen, wandering along a rural highway 50 miles south of Portland. Like Lisa Park, he was disoriented, partially clothed and covered in silk residue. Unlike Lisa, Michael was male, which he had them organized by what he called transformation compatibility. Some were selected for traditional metamorphosis, others for what he called hybrid experimentation. The hybrid experimentation was something new and deeply disturbing. Michael described seeing victims who had undergone surgical procedures that went far beyond the wing attachments we'd seen in the 3 murder victims. Webb and his associates were attempting to create what they called functional human-insect hybrids through a combination of surgery, genetic manipulation, and psychological conditioning. He kept talking about the client requirements. Michael continued like he was filling orders for specific types of products. He had photographs, specifications, delivery schedules. This wasn't just about his personal obsession anymore. He was running a business. The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. We weren't just dealing with a serial killer. We were looking at a human trafficking operation that specialized in creating custom victims for clients with extremely specific and horrific requirements. The transformation theme wasn't just Webb's personal obsession. It was a service being provided to a network of individuals who shared similar twisted desires. I immediately called Assistant Director Jennifer Morrison, my supervisor at the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Ma'am, we need to elevate this case to the highest priority level. We're looking at organized human trafficking with multiple suspects, significant financial backing, and potential interstate commerce violations. I need a full task force, resources from the Bureau's Human Trafficking Division, and coordination with Interpol. Done. How many victims are we talking about? Conservative estimate based on survivor accounts, dozens, possibly more. And ma'am, we have reason to believe some of the victims are being prepared for international shipment. Within 6 hours, our small Portland task force had expanded into a major multi-agency operation. Representatives from the FBI's Human Trafficking Division, the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and Interpol had converged on Portland. The case had grown from a serial killer investigation into what looked like one of the most sophisticated and disturbing trafficking operations ever uncovered. Spencer Reed's expanded database search had yielded a treasure trove of information about Webb's network. The financial backing was coming from a shell company with ties to individuals in 3 different countries, all with histories of acquiring exotic and illegal items for private collectors. The operation had been running for at least 2 years, with carefully laundered payments totaling over $3 million. But the most disturbing discovery came from analyzing Webb's computer records, which Michael Chen had helped us locate by describing the underground facility's layout. The hard drives contained detailed files on hundreds of potential victims, organized by physical characteristics, psychological profiles, and what were labeled as transformation specifications. The files revealed that Webb's network had been surveilling college campuses across the Pacific Northwest for years, building dossiers on students who fit their clients' requirements. They had photographs, class schedules, social media profiles, and detailed behavioral assessments. The level of planning was extraordinary and terrifying. Among the files, we found something that made my blood run cold. A folder labeled law enforcement targets that contained detailed information about investigators who had been working trafficking cases in the region. My own photograph was in the file, along with comprehensive information about my background, my family, and my investigative methods. They knew we were coming. The tactical approach to Webb's cabin was now a full-scale operation involving over 50 federal agents, local law enforcement, and specialized units from multiple agencies. Thermal imaging and electronic surveillance had confirmed that the cabin was empty, but there were signs of recent activity and evidence that the operation had been hastily relocated. What we found inside the cabin was like stepping into a museum of horrors designed by someone with a PhD in applied evil. The main room had been converted into what appeared to be a combination laboratory and art studio. Workbenches lined the walls covered with equipment for silk production, chemical synthesis, and what appeared to be surgical instruments of unusual design. Glass cases displayed hundreds of preserved butterfly specimens, but closer examination revealed that many of the butterflies were actually created from human tissue samples. The basement had been excavated and expanded into a complex of interconnected chambers, each designed for a specific purpose in Webb's transformation process. The preparation chamber where Lisa Park had been held was sterile and clinical, with precise environmental controls and monitoring equipment. Adjacent chambers contained what appeared to be surgical suites, recovery areas, and something that could only be described as a packaging facility. But it was the final chamber that revealed the true scope of Webb's operation. The walls were lined with what appeared to be shipping containers, each labeled with alphanumeric codes and destination information. Several containers were empty, but others contained equipment, supplies, and documentation that painted a picture of an international network of individuals with interests similar to Webb's. Among the documentation, we found client lists with names that appeared in law enforcement databases across multiple countries. There were orders for specific types of victims, detailed specifications for transformation procedures, and shipping manifests for biological specimens that had been sent to locations in Europe, Asia, and South America. The evidence room at the Portland field office began to look like the storage facility for a particularly twisted museum. We had recovered over 2,000 pieces of evidence, including computer hard drives, financial records, medical equipment, preserved specimens, and documentation of trafficking activities spanning multiple years and countries. But Webb himself remained at large, along with at least 3 known associates, and an unknown number of victims who had been moved before our raid. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Dr. Emma Hartley, the medical examiner who had been working with us from the beginning, while analyzing tissue samples from the cabin, she discovered something that changed our understanding of Webb's methodology. The silk material isn't naturally produced, she told me, pointing to microscopic images on her computer screen. It's a synthetic compound that mimics natural silk proteins, but it's been engineered to include what appears to be human DNA sequences. Human DNA from whom? That's the disturbing part. The DNA sequences appear to be from the victims themselves. Webb was somehow extracting genetic material from his victims and incorporating it into the silk, used to create their cocoons. It's like he was trying to create a biological connection between the victims and their transformation. This revelation led us to a deeper understanding of Webb's psychological motivology. He wasn't just killing people or even just transforming them. He was trying to create a new form of life that combined human consciousness with what he perceived as the perfection of insect existence. But more importantly, Dr. Hartley's analysis revealed something that gave us our first real lead on Webb's current location. The DNA sequences show markers that suggest recent collection within the past 48 hours. And there's something else. The silk samples contain trace elements that are only found in specific geographical locations. Based on the mineral composition, I'd say this material was produced somewhere in the Cascade Range, probably within 100 miles of Mount Rainier. The helicopter flight over the Cascade Range revealed the true scope of the challenge we faced. The mountain wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions. Thousands of square miles of dense forest, hidden valleys and remote locations where a sophisticated operation could remain undetected for years. Our target was a facility that Michael Chen had described based on his memories of the transportation route from his point of capture to Webb's underground laboratory. He remembered specific landmarks: a waterfall visible from the road, a distinctive rock formation, the sound of aircraft overhead suggesting proximity to a major flight path. Working with geographic information systems specialists and satellite imagery analysts, we'd narrowed the search area to a region about 30 miles northeast of Mount Rainier National Park. The terrain was challenging, accessible only by logging roads and hiking trails, perfect for someone who wanted to operate without interference. The facility, when we finally located it, was a masterpiece of concealment. From above, it appeared to be nothing more than a small cabin and outbuildings, the kind of rustic retreat that wealthy urbanites used for. The FBI's hostage rescue team took point. Supported by agents from the Bureau's evidence response team and medical personnel, prepared to deal with both traumatized survivors and the kind of physical evidence we expected to find. As we moved into position around the facility, I found myself thinking about the victims we knew about and the ones we might never identify. Jessica Chen, Amy Rodriguez, Patricia Williams, their deaths had been the visible tip of an iceberg of human suffering that extended far beyond what any of us had initially imagined. The assault on the compound began at dawn on March 28th, 13 days after I'd first arrived in Portland to investigate what I thought was a straightforward serial killer case. The operation involved over 80 federal agents, local law enforcement officers, and support personnel, making it one of the largest domestic law enforcement operations in the Pacific Northwest in decades. What we found inside the facility exceeded our worst expectations. The underground complex consisted of 12 interconnected chambers, each designed for specific aspects of Webb's operation. The entrance chamber appeared to be a normal basement, but hidden doors led to a maze of rooms that revealed the true scope of the trafficking network. The first chamber we entered was what could only be described as a victim processing center. Stainless steel tables lined the walls, each equipped with restraint systems and monitoring equipment. Medical charts hung on clipboards, detailing the physical and psychological profiles of dozens of individuals. Some of the names matched missing persons, reports from across the Pacific Northwest. Others were people whose disappearances had never been reported or investigated. The second chamber contained what appeared to be a sophisticated surgical suite, complete with operating tables, anesthesia equipment, and instruments I couldn't identify. The walls were lined with photographs documenting various stages of Webb's transformation procedures, creating a gallery of human suffering that made even experienced agents physically ill. But it was the third chamber that revealed the true horror of Webb's operation. It contained 12 cylindrical containers, each about the size of a large refrigerator, filled with a viscous fluid that maintained specific temperature and chemical conditions. Inside each container was a human being in various stages of Webb's transformation process. Some were in the early stages of paralysis, floating unconsciously in the fluid, while monitoring equipment tracked their vital signs. Others showed evidence of surgical modification, with wing-like appendages grafted onto their backs and other alterations that defied rational comprehension. 2 of the containers held victims who appeared to be in the final stages of what Webb called emergence, their bodies so extensively modified that they barely appeared human. All of them were alive. "Jesus Christ," whispered Agent Thompson from the hostage rescue team. "How many victims are we looking at?" Before I could answer, we heard sounds from deeper in the complex. Voices, movement, the hum of machinery. Webb and his associates were still on the premises. The tactical team moved with practiced precision through the remaining chambers. We found Webb's office, a sophisticated computer center that served as the nerve center for the trafficking network. Hard drives contained client communications, financial records, and shipping manifests for specimens that had been distributed globally over the past 3 years. The files revealed that Webb's network was far more extensive than we'd imagined. They had clients in 17 countries, associates in major cities across North America and Europe, and connections to other trafficking organizations that specialized in different types of human exploitation. This wasn't just about Webb's personal obsession with transformation. It was an international business serving a clientele with extremely specific and horrific requirements. We found the laboratory, where Webb had developed his synthetic paralytic compounds and silk materials. The equipment was sophisticated enough to rival major pharmaceutical research facilities, suggesting significant financial backing and possibly assistance from individuals with legitimate scientific credentials. The shipping and packaging facility contained evidence of dozens of completed orders that had been sent to clients worldwide. Crates were labeled with codes that corresponded to specific client requirements, and shipping manifests showed deliveries to addresses in locations as diverse as a private estate in Switzerland, a research facility in Japan, and what appeared to be a private club in the Bahamas. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. In the final chamber, we found Webb himself along with 3 associates, preparing what appeared to be an emergency evacuation of the facility. They were loading victims into specially designed transport containers, preparing to move the operation to another location. Dr. Marcus Webb was exactly what I'd expected based on our psychological profile. Tall, thin, with a kind of intense focus that suggested complete disconnection from normal human empathy. He was wearing surgical scrubs and appeared to be in the middle of performing some kind of procedure on a victim when we breached the chamber. "Federal agents, everyone on the ground now." Webb looked up from his work with the kind of mild annoyance one might show when interrupted during an important task. He made no move to comply with the agent's commands, instead continuing what he was doing as if we weren't there. "Agent Mitchell, I presume," he said without looking away from his victim. "I've been following your work on the BAU. Quite impressive, really, though I must say I thought you'd figure it out sooner." The casual admission sent chills down my spine. This wasn't going to be a typical arrest. Webb had been expecting us, had planned for this moment, and had something more in mind than simple surrender. "Dr. Webb, step away from the victim and put your hands where we can see them." Victim, his eyebrows raised in apparent surprise. "Agent Mitchell, I prefer to think of my work as evolutionary advancement. These individuals were selected because they possessed the potential to become something beautiful, something beyond the limitations of human existence." As the tactical agents moved to secure the other suspects, Webb continued his monologue, seemingly oblivious to the weapons trained on him. "Do you have any idea how many species of butterflies there are in the world, Agent Mitchell? Over 7,500, each one a miracle of transformation, of becoming something greater than what they started as. Humans are so limited, So bound by their crude physical forms and primitive psychological structures, I simply gave these people the opportunity to transcend those limitations. Where are the other victims, Dr. Webb? His smile widened, and I realized that this had all been planned. The easy discovery of the facility, the timing of our arrival, Webb's presence during the raid, it was all part of some larger scheme. Other victims or other miracles? Agent Mitchell, what you found here represents only a small portion of our work. The collection has been growing for years, and it's now distributed across locations that your limited investigative capabilities will never uncover. Behind Webb, I could see the victim he'd been working on, a young woman who appeared to be in the early stages of his transformation process. She was conscious, her eyes moving frantically as she tried to communicate despite being paralyzed. The sight of her terror filled me with a rage I'd rarely experienced in 15 years of law enforcement. Step away from her, Dr. Webb, now. But he wasn't listening. Instead, he reached for what appeared to be a syringe filled with some kind of fluid. Agent Mitchell, you arrived just in time to witness the final emergence. This specimen has been in preparation for 6 months. The client specifically requested someone with her particular physical and psychological characteristics. The transformation is nearly complete. I drew my weapon, dropped the syringe, Dr. Webb, but he had already plunged it into the victim's IV line. The woman's body began convulsing as whatever compound he'd injected took effect. Don't you want to see the miracle, Agent Mitchell? Don't you want to witness the birth of something beautiful? That's when I shot him. I'd never killed anyone in the line of duty before, despite 15 years of chasing the worst humanity had to offer. But watching Dr. Marcus Webb poison his victim while delivering his twisted manifesto triggered something primal in me. 3-round center mass, and the monster finally stopped talking. The victim, later identified as Amanda Rodriguez, a 22-year-old art student from Seattle who'd been missing for 8 months, survived, though the physical and psychological trauma will stay with her forever. The compound Webb had injected was designed to accelerate his transformation process, but the medical team was able to counteract its effects before permanent damage occurred. In the following weeks, we rescued 12 more victims from Webb's facility, though several required extensive medical treatment and psychological counseling to recover from their ordeal. The surgical modifications Webb had performed were thankfully largely superficial, designed more for his client's twisted aesthetics than actual functionality. But the investigation was far from over. The computer files we recovered from Webb's facility painted a picture of an international trafficking network that extended far beyond anything we'd initially imagined. The butterfly collector, as the media had dubbed Webb, had been just one node in a web of criminal enterprises that specialized in providing custom victims to clients with extremely specific requirements. The client communications revealed a sophisticated marketplace where human beings were ordered like catalog items. Requests came with detailed specifications, physical characteristics, psychological profiles, and specific types of modifications that clients wanted performed. The prices ranged from $50,000 for basic specimens to over $500,000 for victims who underwent Webb's full transformation process. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that several of Webb's clients were themselves operating similar facilities in other countries. We found correspondence with individuals running operations in Romania, Thailand, and Colombia, all sharing techniques and best practices for victim acquisition, processing, and transport. The international scope of the network required coordination with law enforcement agencies across multiple continents. Interpol took the lead on the global investigation, while the FBI coordinated domestic efforts to identify and rescue victims who had been transported within the United States. Over the following months, raids on associated facilities led to the rescue of over 200 victims and the arrest of 47 individuals in 12 countries. The network had been operating for at least 5 years, generating an estimated $50 million in revenue from the sale of human beings to clients, with interest ranging from scientific experimentation to private entertainment. But for every facility we discovered, there were indications of others that remained hidden. Webb's files contained references to sister operations and affiliated collectors that we were never able to identify. The scope of the network suggested that what we'd uncovered was only a fraction of a much larger criminal enterprise. The psychological profiles of the network's operators revealed a disturbing pattern. Unlike traditional human traffickers who were motivated primarily by financial gain, these individuals were driven by shared obsessions with transformation, control, and what they perceived as evolutionary advancement. They saw themselves not as criminals, but as pioneers in a new form of human development. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the FBI's chief behavioral analyst, spent months studying the psychological dynamics of the network. Her report concluded that we were dealing with a new type of organized crime, one that combined the financial motivations of traditional trafficking with the ideological obsessions typically associated with cult behavior. These individuals genuinely believe they're performing a service. Dr. Morrison explained during a briefing at FBI headquarters, they've convinced themselves that their victims are willing participants in some kind of evolutionary experiment. The psychological conditioning they use isn't just about control. It's about creating a shared delusion that justifies their actions. The conditioning process Webb and his associates used was more sophisticated than anything we'd encountered in previous trafficking cases. Victims were subjected to months of psychological manipulation designed to break down their sense of individual identity and replace it with acceptance of their role as specimens in the transformation process. Some victims were so thoroughly conditioned that they actively resisted rescue efforts, insisting that they were participating in important scientific work. The deprogramming process required specialized therapeutic interventions and sometimes took years to complete. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the investigation was the discovery that the network had been actively recruiting new operators, particularly individuals with scientific backgrounds who shared their obsessions with transformation and human modification. We found evidence of recruitment efforts targeting researchers who had been dismissed from legitimate institutions, medical professionals who had lost their licenses, and graduate students whose research interests aligned with the network's activities. The recruitment process was careful and methodical, designed to identify individuals who might be susceptible to the network's ideological framework. The financial structure of the network was equally sophisticated. Payments were processed through a complex web of shell companies and cryptocurrency transactions that made it extremely difficult to trace the flow of money. The network had its own banking relationships, investment portfolios, and what appeared to be legitimate business fronts that generated revenue to support their illegal activities. Most disturbing was the discovery that some of the network's clients were themselves wealthy individuals who used their legitimate businesses and social connections to provide cover for their illegal activities. We found evidence linking network clients to prominent figures in business, politics, and entertainment. Though many of these connections proved difficult to investigate due to their wealth and influence, the recovery process for Webb's victims was unlike anything in my experience with trauma survivors. The combination of physical modifications, psychological conditioning, and extended captivity had created a unique set of challenges that required innovative therapeutic approaches. Dr. Sarah Williamson, a trauma specialist brought in from the FBI's Victim Services Division, established a specialized treatment program at a secure facility in Oregon. The program was designed to address both the physical and psychological aspects of the victim's experiences, while providing protection from potential retaliation by network associates who remained at large. Traditional PTSD treatment approaches aren't sufficient for these victims. Dr. Williamson explained, "We're dealing with individuals who were subjected to systematic dehumanization over extended periods. Many of them have lost their sense of individual identity and need to essentially relearn how to exist as autonomous human beings." Lisa Park, the survivor who had provided crucial information during our investigation, became an advocate for other victims and an important resource in developing treatment protocols. Her recovery process was documented to help inform therapeutic approaches for other survivors. "The hardest part wasn't the physical abuse," Lisa told me during one of our follow-up interviews. "It was the way they made you believe that what was happening was somehow beneficial, that you were participating in something important. Even after being rescued, part of me kept wondering if I'd made a mistake by escaping." The conditioning process used by Webb and his associates was designed to create exactly this kind of psychological dependency. Victims were gradually isolated from their previous identities and convinced that their transformation was a form of evolutionary advancement that would benefit not just themselves, but humanity as a whole. Michael Chen, the second survivor we'd encountered, had a particularly difficult recovery process. His longer captivity had resulted in more extensive conditioning, and he struggled with what therapists called survivor guilt, a sense that he had somehow betrayed the other victims by escaping. I knew there were others in the facility who were in worse condition than I was, he told me. Part of me felt like I should have tried to help them, but I was so focused on getting out that I didn't think about anything else. Now I wonder if some of them died because I didn't try to save them. The reality was that Michael's escape had probably saved dozens of lives by providing us with the information we needed to locate Webb's facility. But the psychological trauma of his experience made it difficult for him to accept that his actions had been heroic rather than selfish. Amanda Rodriguez, the victim Webb had been preparing to kill during our raid, faced perhaps the greatest challenges in her recovery. The extensive psychological conditioning she'd endured, combined with the physical trauma of Webb's modification procedures, had left her with severe dissociative symptoms and difficulty distinguishing between reality and the delusions Webb had carefully constructed. "Sometimes I still believe I'm supposed to be there," she admitted during a therapy session I was permitted to observe. "Part of me thinks that being rescued was a mistake, that I was supposed to complete the transformation process. I know intellectually that those thoughts aren't rational, but emotionally they feel real." The treatment program Dr. Williamson developed focused on helping victims rebuild their sense of personal identity and autonomy. The process involved intensive individual therapy, group sessions with other survivors, and gradual reintegration into normal social environments. But the recovery process was complicated by the ongoing investigation and the knowledge that other network operators remained at large. Several survivors received credible threats from unknown individuals, requiring them to remain in protective custody even after their initial treatment was completed. The threats weren't idle. 6 months after Webb's death, Lisa Park's apartment was broken into by individuals who left behind photographs of her during her captivity, along with a note suggesting that her transformation was incomplete. She was immediately relocated to a secure facility and provided with federal protection. Similar incidents occurred with other survivors, suggesting that the network was still active and viewing the rescued victims as property that needed to be recovered. The psychological impact of these threats often undid months of therapeutic progress and required survivors to essentially start their recovery process over again. 18 months after the raid on Webb's facility, the investigation remained active across multiple countries. While we'd successfully dismantled the immediate network centered around Webb's operation, evidence continued to surface, suggesting that similar organizations were operating independently in other regions. The pattern of victims found in cocoon-like wrappings began appearing in crime scenes across Europe and Asia. Local law enforcement agencies initially treated these as isolated incidents, but the FBI's analysis of crime scene photographs and forensic evidence revealed striking similarities to Webb's methodology. A case in Romania involved 3 victims found suspended from trees in a remote forest, preserved wrapped in silk, material that forensic analysis showed contained synthetic compounds similar to those Webb had developed. The victims showed evidence of paralytic poisoning and surgical modifications that matched the techniques documented in Webb's laboratory. Similar cases appeared in Thailand, where local police found an underground facility containing equipment and documentation that appeared to be directly copied from Webb's operation. The facility had been hastily abandoned, but evidence suggested it had been operational for at least 2 years and had processed dozens of victims. The international nature of these copycat operations raised disturbing questions about how Webb's techniques and methodologies were being disseminated. Computer analysis of the network's communications revealed that Webb had been in regular contact with individuals who appeared to be establishing their own facilities using his methods as a template. "We're not just dealing with a single criminal network anymore," explained Assistant Director Morrison during a briefing at FBA headquarters. Webb's operation appears to have spawned a new type of organized crime that's spreading internationally. We are seeing evidence of similar facilities being established by individuals who may have never had direct contact with Webb, but who are using his methodology as a blueprint. The phenomenon was similar to what terrorism experts had observed with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, a central organization that inspired independent groups to adopt their methods and ideology. In Webb's case, the ideology centered around transformation and human modification, but the operational techniques were being replicated by criminals with their own motivations and client bases. The FBI's response involved establishing a specialized task force dedicated to tracking these emerging networks. The Butterfly Task Force, as it became known internally, coordinated with international law enforcement agencies to share intelligence and coordinate investigations. But the task force faced significant challenges. The networks were highly sophisticated in their operational security, using encrypted communications and cryptocurrency transactions that made them difficult to track. They also learned from Webb's mistakes, implementing better concealment methods and more careful victim selection processes that reduced their visibility to law enforcement. Perhaps most frustratingly, the networks appeared to be adapting their methods in response to our investigative techniques. Crime scenes that initially matched Webb's signature began showing subtle variations that suggested the operators were deliberately modifying their approaches to avoid detection. Spencer Reed, who had become the Bureau's leading expert on transformation-based trafficking networks, spent months analyzing these variations to identify patterns that might lead us to new facilities. "They're treating this like a science," he explained. "Each operation learns from the successes and failures of previous cases, then adapts their methodology accordingly. It's like trying to track an organism that's evolving in real time to evade capture." The psychological profiles of network operators also began showing evolution. While Webb and his immediate associates had been driven primarily by ideological obsessions with transformation, newer operators appeared to be more pragmatically motivated, viewing the transformation theme as a market niche rather than a genuine belief system. This shift made the newer networks potentially more dangerous, as they were less constrained by the ideological limitations that had ultimately led to Webb's downfall. They were willing to modify their methods, target different victim populations, and adapt their services to meet changing client demands. The client base was also evolving. While Webb's network had primarily served individuals with specific transformation obsessions, newer networks were attracting clients with different motivations. Some appeared to be using the transformation process as a form of torture or punishment, others as a way to create victims for specific types of exploitation. The diversification of client motivations meant that the networks were becoming less predictable in their victim selection and methodology. This made it increasingly difficult to anticipate their activities or identify potential targets for rescue operations. 3 years after I first arrived in Portland to investigate what I thought was a straightforward serial killer case, the impact of the Butterfly Collector investigation continues to ripple through law enforcement communities worldwide. The case fundamentally changed how we approach human trafficking investigations and highlighted the emergence of new forms of organized crime that combine traditional criminal motivations with ideological obsessions. The FBI's training programs now include specialized modules on transformation-based trafficking networks, and behavioral analysts are taught to recognize the psychological signatures associated with these types of operations. The techniques we developed during the Webb investigation have been used successfully in dozens of other cases. The survivors themselves have become powerful advocates for improved victim services and more aggressive prosecution of trafficking networks. Lisa Park established a foundation that provides support for survivors of extreme trafficking situations, while Michael Chen has worked with law enforcement agencies to develop better techniques for victim identification and rescue. Amanda Rodriguez's recovery has been more challenging, but she has gradually rebuilt her life. and now works as a counselor specializing in dissociative disorders. Her insights into the psychological impact of transformation trafficking have been invaluable in developing more effective treatment approaches. But the investigation also revealed uncomfortable truths about the scope of human exploitation and the sophistication of modern trafficking networks. The clients we identified represented a cross-section of wealthy and influential individuals from around the world, suggesting that demand for extreme forms of human exploitation exists at all levels of society. The financial resources available to these networks and their ability to corrupt legitimate institutions and individuals demonstrated that trafficking has evolved. Far beyond the stereotypical image of crude criminal enterprises, modern trafficking networks operate like sophisticated businesses with research and development divisions, quality control processes, and customer service departments. Perhaps most disturbing was the realization that Webb's network represented just one variation on themes that exist throughout the trafficking world. The transformation obsession was unique to Webb and his associates, but the underlying structure, sophisticated victim acquisition, elaborate conditioning processes, custom modification services, could be applied to almost any form of human exploitation. The case files remain active with ongoing investigations in 17 countries. New evidence continues to surface, sometimes years after it was initially collected, providing leads that take investigators down new paths of inquiry. The scope of the networks we've uncovered suggests that we may never fully understand the extent of the damage they caused or the number of victims they processed. The body count started in Phoenix on a Tuesday morning that would forever change how the Bureau understood the reach of Mexican cartels into American cities. What appeared to be a routine gang shooting in a South Phoenix warehouse district would unravel into the largest interstate organized crime investigation in the Southwest's history. I'd been working organized crime for the FBI's El Paso Field Division for 8 years when I got the call from Assistant Special Agent in Charge Rebecca Torres. The Phoenix Police Department had requested federal assistance on what they initially thought was a local turf war between rival gangs. 4 bodies, execution-style killings, all with connections to drug distribution networks that stretched from the Mexican border to as far north as Denver. "Santos, I need you in Phoenix by noon," Torres said, her voice carrying that edge that meant something big was developing. PPD found something at the scene that suggests we're not dealing with local players. What kind of something? The kind that has Homeland Security, DEA, and the U.S. Attorney's Office all asking questions we don't have answers to yet. 3 hours later, I was standing in a Phoenix warehouse, that riot of death and cordite, staring at a crime scene that would haunt federal law enforcement for the next 2 years. The warehouse was located in an industrial district south of Sky Harbor Airport, the kind of area where legitimate businesses mixed with operations that preferred to avoid scrutiny. The 4 victims had been arranged in what could only be described as a display. Each body was positioned kneeling, hands zip-tied behind their backs, single gunshot wounds to the back of the head. But it was what surrounded them that caught my attention and explained why multiple federal agencies were suddenly interested in what should have been a local homicide case. Scattered around the bodies were documents, photographs, and electronic devices that painted a picture of an operation far more sophisticated than typical street-level drug dealing. There were shipping manifests for cargo containers, customs documentation for legitimate import businesses, and financial records showing wired transfers in amounts that suggested serious money was moving through this network. Detective Ray Castellanos from Phoenix PD's Organized Crime Unit walked me through what they'd found so far. Castellanos was a 20-year veteran who'd seen every variation of drug-related violence the desert had to offer. But even he seemed shaken by the scope of what they'd uncovered. The primary victim is Eduardo Morales, 34, legitimate businessman on paper, owns 3 import-export companies with offices in Phoenix, Tucson, and Albuquerque. Clean record, pays his taxes, even donated to local charities. Problem is, his businesses were moving a lot more than the pottery and textiles listed on their customs forms. Castellanos handed me a thick folder containing financial documents that had been recovered from a safe in the warehouse office. The numbers were staggering. Wire transfers totaling over $50 million in the past 18 months, all flowing through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Who else do we have? Victim 2 is Carlos Mendoza, Morales Logistics Coordinator. Former military, served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a transportation specialist. Guy knew how to move things without attracting attention. Victim 3 is Maria Santos. No relation, I assume. She was the financial operations manager. MBA from ASU. Worked for several legitimate firms before joining Morales' organization 2 years ago. I studied the photographs of the victims, noting the professional nature of their execution. These weren't heat killings or the result of a deal gone wrong. Someone had planned this carefully, eliminating key personnel in what appeared to be a systematic dismantling of Morales' operation. What about victim 4? Castellanos hesitated for a moment, exchanging glances with his partner. That's where this gets interesting. James Fletcher, 41 DEA informant, who'd been providing intelligence on cartel operations in Arizona for the past 3 years. According to his handler, Fletcher had been reporting increased activity in the Phoenix area, suggested that someone was consolidating multiple trafficking routes under a single organization. The revelation that a federal informant had been among the victims elevated this from a local crime to a potential national security issue. If cartels were sophisticated enough to identify and eliminate federal assets, we were dealing with organizations that had intelligence capabilities rivaling legitimate governments. I called Assistant Director Patricia Morrow at FBI headquarters in Washington. Morrow oversaw the Bureau's transnational organized crime program and had been tracking the evolution of Mexican cartels for over a decade. Pat, we have a situation in Phoenix that looks like it might connect to broader cartel consolidation activities. I need a multi-agency task force and resources for what could be a major interstate investigation. How major are we talking, Miguel? Conservative estimate. Multi-state trafficking network with sophisticated money laundering operations, possible corruption of legitimate businesses and government officials and intelligence, capabilities advanced enough to identify and eliminate federal informants. We could be looking at billions in drug money and distribution networks that stretch from Mexico to Canada. You'll have whatever you need. I'm establishing a joint task force under your direction. Representatives from DEA, Homeland Security, IRS Criminal Investigation, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection will be in Phoenix by tomorrow morning. The next phase of the investigation began with analyzing the financial documents recovered from the warehouse. What we found revealed a level of sophistication that challenged everything we thought we knew about cartel operations in the United States. The network wasn't just moving drugs. It was a fully integrated criminal enterprise that included legitimate businesses, sophisticated money laundering operations, and what appeared to be corruption networks that extended into government agencies at multiple levels. Bank records showed transactions with companies in 12 states, suggesting a distribution network that covered most of the American Southwest and extended into the Midwest. But it was the customs documentation that provided our first real break in the case. Mixed in with legitimate shipping manifests were documents showing cargo containers that had been processed through ports in Long Beach, California, and Houston, Texas, with final destinations including Phoenix, Denver, Kansas City, and Chicago. The containers were listed as containing various manufactured goods from Mexico: furniture, textiles, pottery, electronics, but the scope of the operation was staggering. Container manifests showed shipments arriving every 2 weeks for the past 18 months, with estimated street values in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The drugs were being distributed through networks that included not just traditional street dealers, but legitimate businesses that provided cover for money laundering and distribution activities. But the most disturbing aspect of the investigation was what we weren't finding. Despite the massive scale of the operation, there was almost no street-level violence associated with the network. Traditional cartel operations were characterized by territorial disputes, violent enforcement actions, and high-profile displays of power. This network was operating almost invisibly, avoiding the kind of attention that typically brought federal law enforcement into cartel investigations. They've learned, explained Dr. Robert Kim, a criminal intelligence analyst from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit who specialized in organized crime psychology. Traditional cartel operations attracted law enforcement attention because of their violence and territorial behavior. This network has eliminated those characteristics while maintaining operational effectiveness. They're operating more like a multinational corporation than a traditional criminal organization. The corporate comparison was more accurate than we initially realized. As we dug deeper into the financial records, we discovered that the network maintained human resources departments, quality control processes, customer service operations, and even employee benefits programs. They were treating drug trafficking like any other business, complete with performance metrics, profit and loss statements, and strategic planning processes. But it was the intelligence capabilities that truly set this network apart from traditional cartel operations. The systematic elimination of Eduardo Morales and his team suggested that someone had detailed knowledge of their operations, their personnel, and their vulnerabilities. The fact that a federal informant had been identified and eliminated indicated intelligence gathering capabilities that rivaled those of legitimate law enforcement agencies. The break in the case came from an unexpected source, a traffic stop in Denver that initially appeared to have no connection to our Phoenix investigation. Colorado State Patrol had pulled over a semi-truck for routine inspection on Interstate 25 south of Denver. The driver had proper documentation. The cargo manifest listed furniture and textiles from Mexico, and everything appeared legitimate. But Trooper Amanda Martinez noticed something that saved the investigation. The truck's GPS unit showed recent travel to locations that didn't match the declared route. Instead of traveling directly from the port in Houston to Denver, the truck had made stops in Phoenix, Albuquerque, and Colorado Springs. Stops that weren't reflected in any of the shipping documentation. When Martinez called in the discrepancy, the inquiry was routed to our task force because the truck's cargo originated from one of the shipping companies connected to Eduardo Morales' network. Within 6 hours, we had search warrants and a team of agents examining every inch of the truck and its contents. What we found revolutionized our understanding of how modern cartels were adapting to law enforcement pressure. The truck contained legitimate furniture and textiles, exactly as declared on the customs forms. But hidden within specially constructed compartments in some of the furniture pieces were over 200 kilos of pure fentanyl, 150 kilos of heroin, and 500 kilos of cocaine. The concealment method was sophisticated beyond anything we'd seen before. The drugs were packaged in custom-molded containers that perfectly matched the internal dimensions of furniture pieces, then sealed using techniques that made detection nearly impossible without complete disassembly. Each piece of furniture was still functional and could be sold to legitimate customers, providing perfect cover for the trafficking operation. But the most significant discovery was a tablet computer hidden in the truck's cab that contained detailed information about the network's operations across multiple states. The device was encrypted, but our cybercrime specialists were able to extract data that painted a picture of an organization that was operating on a scale we'd never encountered. The network wasn't just distributing drugs. It was providing a full range of criminal services, including money laundering, weapons trafficking, human smuggling, and what appeared to be contract enforcement services. They had operations in at least 8 states, with distribution hubs in major cities and supply chains that extended from Mexico to Canada. The organizational structure revealed in the computer files showed a level of sophistication that challenged our assumptions about cartel operations. Instead of the traditional hierarchical structure associated with Mexican cartels, this network operated more like a franchise system, with semi-autonomous cells in different cities that shared resources and coordinated activities while maintaining operational independence. Each cell specialized in different aspects of the criminal enterprise. The Phoenix cell had focused on importation and initial distribution, while cells in Denver, Kansas City, and Chicago handled regional distribution and money laundering. A cell in Houston managed port operations and customs documentation, while cells in California handled coordination with Mexican suppliers. But it was the leadership structure that proved most difficult to penetrate. Instead of a single leader or small group of leaders, the network appeared to be managed by a council of representatives from different cells. Decision-making was distributed, and no single individual had complete knowledge of all operations. A structure designed to limit damage from law enforcement infiltration or arrests. The investigation expanded rapidly as we traced connections revealed by the Denver truck seizure. Financial records showed transactions with businesses in Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, California, and Nevada. We were looking at a criminal enterprise that generated hundreds of millions of dollars annually and had the organizational sophistication to operate across state lines while avoiding detection. Special Agent Lisa Rodriguez from our Financial Crimes Division took the lead on following the money trail. What she found revealed a money laundering operation that was more sophisticated than many legitimate financial institutions. They're not just washing drug money, Rodriguez explained during a task force briefing. They've created an entire parallel financial system that allows them to move money internationally while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business transactions. The money laundering network included dozens of shell companies, offshore accounts in multiple countries, cryptocurrency exchanges, and what appeared to be corruption relationships with employees at legitimate financial institutions. Money could be moved from street-level sales in Chicago to accounts in Mexico within hours, passing through multiple institutions and jurisdictions in ways that made tracking nearly impossible. But the network's sophistication extended beyond financial operations. Intelligence files recovered from the Denver truck revealed that the organization maintained detailed surveillance on law enforcement activities, including profiles of federal agents, local police officers, and prosecutors who worked organized crime cases. My own photograph was in the files along with information about my background, my family, and my investigative methods. The profile was comprehensive enough to suggest that someone had been monitoring my activities for months, possibly years. Similar profiles existed for dozens of other law enforcement personnel across multiple agencies and jurisdictions. The surveillance capabilities implied the existence of intelligence networks within law enforcement agencies, government institutions, and legitimate businesses. The organization wasn't just avoiding law enforcement, it was actively monitoring our activities and adapting its operations to stay ahead of our investigations. Following the financial trail from Denver led us to Kansas City, Missouri, where we discovered what appeared to be the network's primary money laundering hub. The operation was centered around a legitimate business district near the Kansas City Board of Trade, where several shell companies maintained offices in respectable buildings alongside established financial firms. The Kansas City cell was managed by someone identified in the computer files only as the accountant, an individual who appeared to oversee financial operations for the entire network. Intelligence indicated that the accountant was a former Wall Street investment banker who had been recruited by the network after being fired from a major financial firm for unauthorized trading activities. Working with the FBI's Kansas City field office, we established surveillance on 3 buildings that appeared to be connected to the network's financial operations. What cash would arrive from distribution cells across the country via armored car services that appeared to be legitimate cash transport companies, but were actually controlled by the network. The cash would be processed through counting machines, tested for law enforcement tracking devices, and then fed into the money laundering system. Special Agent David Park from the FBI's Cybercrime Division worked with our team to analyze the electronic aspects of the money laundering operation. What he found revealed a level of technological sophistication that rivaled major banks. They've developed their own software systems for tracking transactions, managing accounts, and coordinating activities across multiple cells. Park explained, "The system is more secure and more efficient than many legitimate financial institutions. They are using artificial intelligence to optimize money flows and minimize detection risks." The AI systems were particularly concerning because they allowed the network to adapt to law enforcement activities in real time. The software monitored news reports, law enforcement communications, and financial institution reporting patterns to identify potential threats and automatically adjust operations to avoid detection. But the most disturbing discovery was evidence that the network was using its financial resources to corrupt officials at multiple levels of government. Bank records showed payments to individuals identified only by code names, but cross-referencing with other intelligence suggested these were bribes to customs officials, local police officers, federal agents, and even judges. The corruption network was carefully compartmentalized with different cells, handling payments to different types of officials. The Kansas City cell specialized in financial institutions and federal agencies, while other cells handled local law enforcement, customs officials, and political figures. We found evidence of retainer payments to defense attorneys in multiple jurisdictions, suggesting that the network was prepared for potential prosecutions and had legal resources in place to defend arrested members. The legal network included former prosecutors, judges, and attorneys with connections to law enforcement agencies. The scope of the corruption suggested that the network had intelligence sources within the very agencies investigating them. Information about our task force activities, investigation targets, and planned operations appeared to be finding its way back to network leadership within hours of being discussed in supposedly secure briefings. Assistant Director Morrow made the difficult decision to compartmentalize the investigation, limiting access to sensitive information to a small group of agents who had been thoroughly vetted. Even within our task force, different teams were given access only to the information necessary for their specific assignments. "We have to assume that everything we do is being monitored," Morrow explained during a secure briefing at FBI headquarters. "The network has demonstrated intelligence capabilities that suggest penetration at multiple levels. We're going to conduct this investigation as if we're operating in a hostile foreign country." The security concerns were validated when we discovered that the network had detailed information about planned raids, arrest warrants, and even the identities of confidential informants. Someone with access to high-level law enforcement intelligence was providing information to the network, and that someone could be in any of the agencies involved in the investigation. The investigation's focus shifted to Chicago, when financial analysis revealed that the Windy City was serving as the network's primary distribution hub for the upper Midwest. The Chicago cell was handling narcotics distribution from Ohio to Minnesota, with supply lines that extended into Canada and revenue streams that flowed back through the Kansas City money laundering operation. Chicago had always been a major hub for organized crime, but this network was operating differently from traditional organized crime families. Instead of controlling territory through violence and intimidation, they were using economic incentives and business relationships to build a distribution network that included legitimate businesses, community organizations, and even religious institutions. Special Agent Maria Gonzalez from the FBI's Chicago field office had been tracking unusual patterns in drug distribution that caught our attention. Instead of the violent territorial disputes typically associated with drug trafficking, Chicago was experiencing a period of relative calm in street-level drug trade, even as the quantity and quality of available narcotics had increased dramatically. "Someone has unified the market," Gonzalez explained during our first briefing in Chicago. "Traditional competing organizations are now working together, sharing territory and coordinating activities. The level of cooperation is unprecedented and suggests external management of the entire drug trade in the metropolitan area." The network had achieved this consolidation through a combination of economic incentives and strategic elimination of uncooperative competitors. Instead of engaging in violent turf wars, they had offered existing drug dealers the opportunity to become distributors for their network, providing higher quality products at better prices while handling supply chain management and territory assignments. Dealers who accepted the arrangement found themselves part of a sophisticated distribution system that included regular supplies of high-quality narcotics, professional packaging and branding, customer service support, and even employee benefits, including healthcare and legal assistance. Those who refused the arrangement often found themselves unable to compete and gradually went out of business. The few who actively opposed the network's expansion were eliminated, but in ways that avoided attracting law enforcement attention. Instead of dramatic public executions, opponents simply disappeared or died in ways that appeared accidental. The message was clear: without creating the kind of violence that typically brought federal attention to drug trafficking operations. The Chicago cell's leadership structure was as sophisticated as its distribution methods. Intelligence indicated that the cell was managed by someone known as the coordinator, who appeared to have extensive experience in logistics and supply chain management. The coordinator oversaw a network of regional managers who handled different aspects of the operation: supply, distribution, security, and financial operations. But it was the security apparatus that most impressed our analysts. The network had developed counter-surveillance capabilities that allowed them to detect law enforcement activities and adjust their operations accordingly. They monitored police communications, tracked the movements of known federal agents, and maintained surveillance on law enforcement facilities. The security measures included sophisticated technology, encrypted communications, signal interception, equipment, and surveillance systems that rivaled those used by legitimate security agencies. But they also included human intelligence networks that provided early warning of law enforcement activities. We discovered that the network had recruited sources within multiple agencies, including local police departments, federal agencies, and even private security firms that worked with law enforcement. The intelligence network was comprehensive enough that the organization often knew about planned operations before some of the officers assigned to participate in them. The recruitment methods used by the network were particularly sophisticated. Instead of traditional corruption approaches involving direct bribery, they used more subtle methods, including romantic relationships, financial investments, and professional opportunities that created ongoing relationships with law enforcement personnel. Some sources appeared to be the California operations were managed through a network of legitimate businesses that provided perfect cover for criminal activities. Import-export companies handled narcotic smuggling, investment firms managed money laundering, and technology companies provided sophisticated communications and security systems for the entire network. Special Agent Robert Chang from the FBI's Los Angeles field office had been investigating unusual patterns in cross-border financial transactions that connected to our broader investigation. Chang's analysis revealed that the network was using California's legitimate international business community as cover for massive money laundering operations. They're not just moving drug money, Chang explained during a secure video conference with our task force. They're providing financial services to multiple criminal organizations across North America. California is serving as the financial services hub for organized crime activities from Mexico to Canada. The scope of the California operations was staggering. Financial records showed transactions totaling over $2 billion annually, with money flowing from criminal organizations across North America to legitimate investments in real estate, technology companies, and entertainment industry ventures. The real estate investments were particularly concerning because they were being used to launder money on a massive scale while creating legitimate assets that could be used as collateral for additional criminal activities. The network had purchased hundreds of properties across California, Nevada, and Arizona, creating a portfolio worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But it was the technology investments that posed the greatest long-term threat to law enforcement. The network was funding legitimate technology companies that were developing advanced encryption software, surveillance systems, and communications platforms. These technologies were being used to support criminal activities while being marketed to legitimate customers, including government agencies. The entertainment industry investments provided cover for money laundering while creating cultural influence that could be used to promote favorable attitudes toward drug use and anti-law enforcement sentiment. The network had invested in production companies, music labels, and digital media platforms that reached millions of Americans. Intelligence analysis revealed that the California operations were managed by someone identified as the investor, who appeared to have extensive experience in venture capital and technology investment. The investor had recruited a team of legitimate business professionals who appeared to be unaware that their activities were being funded by criminal enterprises. The recruitment methods used in California were particularly sophisticated, involving the creation of apparently legitimate investment opportunities that attracted professionals from the financial, technology, and entertainment industries. Many of the recruited individuals appeared to believe they were working for legitimate businesses backed by international investors. The network's use of legitimate professionals provided cover for criminal activities while creating legal barriers to investigation and prosecution. Many of the individuals involved in the network's activities had committed no crimes and were protected by attorney-client privilege, business confidentiality agreements, and other legal protections. As the scope of the network became clear, federal law enforcement faced challenges unlike anything we'd encountered in previous organized crime investigations. The network's use of legitimate businesses, corruption of government officials, and sophisticated intelligence capabilities required a response that went beyond traditional investigative methods. Assistant Director Morrow established a new joint task force that included representatives from every major federal law enforcement agency, as well as international partners from Canada and Mexico. The task force was given unprecedented resources and authorities, including access to intelligence collection capabilities, typically reserved for national security investigations. The decision to treat the network as a national security threat was driven by several factors. The scope of their operations across multiple states and international borders, their intelligence capabilities that rivaled those of hostile foreign governments, their corruption of government officials at multiple levels, and their economic impact on legitimate businesses and financial institutions. But the national security designation also created new challenges. Intelligence agencies were reluctant to share information that might compromise ongoing operations, while law enforcement agencies were concerned that intelligence methods might not produce evidence that could be used in criminal prosecutions. The task force developed a two-track approach. Intelligence operations focused on mapping the network's structure and capabilities, while law enforcement operations focused on building criminal cases that could be prosecuted successfully. The challenge was coordinating these parallel efforts while maintaining operational security in an environment where the network had demonstrated the ability to monitor law enforcement activities. The intelligence operations revealed that the network was far more extensive than our initial investigation had suggested. They had operations in at least 15 states, with international connections to organizations in Mexico, Canada, Colombia, and several Asian countries. The network was generating billions of dollars annually and had corrupted officials at every level of government, from local police officers to federal judges. But the law enforcement operations faced significant challenges. The network's sophisticated counter-surveillance capabilities made traditional investigative methods ineffective, while their corruption networks meant that sensitive information was often compromised before operations could be conducted. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a mid-level manager in the Chicago cell who had been arrested on unrelated charges and decided to cooperate with federal authorities. Antonio Rodriguez had been working for the network for 3 years and had detailed knowledge of their operations, structure, and security measures. Rodriguez's cooperation was a carefully guarded secret, known only to a handful of agents who had been thoroughly vetted for security clearances. His information provided the first comprehensive look at the network's internal operations and revealed vulnerabilities that could be exploited by law enforcement. "They're not as invulnerable as they appear," Rodriguez explained during one of his debriefing sessions. "The network is built on relationships and trust, but it's also highly compartmentalized. Most members only know their immediate colleagues and supervisors. If you can identify and arrest key coordinators, you can disrupt entire regional operations." Rodriguez provided detailed information about the network's communication systems, financial operations, and security measures. Most importantly, he identified several individuals who served as regional coordinators and had broader knowledge of the network's structure. The information from Rodriguez was used to develop a comprehensive takedown plan that would simultaneously target network operations in multiple states. The plan required unprecedented coordination between federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, as well as international partners in Mexico and Canada. The coordinated takedown operation began at dawn on October 15th, exactly 18 months after the Phoenix warehouse murders that had started our investigation. Operation Bloodroots involved over 1,200 law enforcement officers from dozens of agencies, conducting simultaneous raids in 8 states and 3 countries. The scale of the operation was necessary because of the network's sophisticated intelligence capabilities and their ability to rapidly adapt to law enforcement pressure. By hitting multiple targets simultaneously, we hoped to prevent them from adjusting their operations or destroying evidence in response to initial arrests. My role in the operation was coordinating the Arizona phase. The Phoenix raids targeted 3 locations: a warehouse district facility that served as a distribution center, a financial services building that housed money undering operations, and a technology company that provided communications and security services for the network. The warehouse facility was the most challenging target because intelligence suggested it was heavily defended by security personnel with military training. The FBI's SWAT team took the lead, supported by agents from DEA, ATF, and local law enforcement. What we found inside exceeded our expectations. The warehouse contained over $50 million worth of narcotics in various stages of processing and packaging. The facility included sophisticated laboratories for testing and purifying drugs, packaging equipment that created professional quality branded products, and distribution systems that could handle massive volumes of narcotics. But it was the administrative areas that provided the most valuable intelligence. The facility maintained detailed records of all operations, including customer lists, distribution schedules, financial transactions, and personnel records. The scope of the operation was staggering. They were serving customers in over 20 states and generating revenue of over $100 million annually from the Phoenix facility alone. The financial services facility provided insights into the network's money laundering operations that revolutionized our understanding of how modern criminal organizations manage their finances. The facility operated multiple legitimate businesses that processed hundreds of millions of dollars annually while maintaining the appearance of legal commercial activities. The technology company RAID revealed the network's sophisticated communications and security systems. The facility contained server farms, satellite communication equipment, and software development operations that supported criminal activities across North America. The technology was more advanced than many legitimate businesses, with custom-designed systems for encrypted communications, financial transactions, and intelligence gathering. Similar raids in other states yielded comparable results. The Denver operations included distribution facilities, money laundering operations, and what appeared to be a recruitment center for acquiring legitimate businesses that could be used as fronts for criminal activities. The Kansas City raids targeted the network's primary financial operations, recovering records that documented billions of dollars in money laundering activities over the past 5 years. The financial operations were so sophisticated that they had created their own banking systems, complete with credit cards, investment services, and international wire transfer capabilities. The Chicago raids focused on the network's distribution operations, which had consolidated drug trafficking activities across the upper Midwest. The facilities included warehouses, packaging operations, and administrative centers that managed distribution to hundreds of dealers across multiple states. The California raids targeted the network's investment operations, recovering evidence of money laundering activities that involved legitimate businesses, real estate investments, and entertainment industry ventures. The scope of the California operations suggested that the network had successfully infiltrated significant portions of the state's legitimate economy. The immediate results of Operation Bloodroots were impressive by any measure. 247 arrests across 8 states, seizure of over $2 billion in assets, recovery of enough narcotics to supply the entire American market for several months, and disruption of criminal operations that had been generating billions of dollars annually. But the long-term impact of the investigation was more significant than the immediate arrests and seizures. The network's sophisticated organizational structure, intelligence capabilities, and corruption networks represented a new evolution in organized crime that would require fundamental changes in how law enforcement approached these investigations. The prosecution of network members faced unprecedented challenges. The sophisticated organizational structure meant that many individuals had limited knowledge of overall operations and could claim they were unaware of the criminal nature of their activities. The use of legitimate businesses provided legal cover for many activities. While corruption networks complicated efforts to build cases against higher-level figures, the network's intelligence capabilities had allowed them to monitor our investigation from its early stages, giving them time to destroy evidence, relocate operations, and prepare legal defenses. Many of the most significant figures in the network had disappeared before the raids began, suggesting that they had advanced warning of our operations. The corruption investigations that followed Operation Bloodroots revealed the extent to which the network had infiltrated government agencies, law enforcement organizations, and legitimate businesses. Over 50 government officials were eventually charged with corruption-related offenses, including federal agents, customs officials, judges, and elected officials. But the most disturbing revelation was the extent to which the network had succeeded in corrupting the legitimate economy. Their investments in real estate, technology companies, and entertainment ventures had created a parallel economy that generated billions of dollars while appearing completely legitimate. The money laundering operations had been so successful that they had created significant assets that could not be easily recovered by law enforcement. Real estate investments, business acquisitions, and financial instruments had converted criminal proceeds into legitimate assets that were protected by complex legal structures and international laws. The investigation also revealed that the network had been more extensive than our initial assessment had suggested. Intelligence recovered during the raids indicated connections to criminal organizations across North America, Central America, and Asia. The network had been serving as a criminal services provider for organizations involved in drug trafficking, human smuggling, weapons trafficking, and other illegal activities. The technology systems developed by the network had been sold to other criminal organizations, spreading their sophisticated communication and security capabilities throughout the international criminal community. Law enforcement agencies worldwide were now facing criminal organizations with intelligence and operational capabilities that had been developed and tested by the network we had dismantled. 5 years after Operation Bloodroots, the investigation continues to influence how federal law enforcement approaches organized crime. The network's sophistication had demonstrated that traditional, organized crime investigations were inadequate for addressing modern criminal enterprises that operated more like multinational corporations than traditional criminal organizations. The FBI established a new transnational criminal enterprises division specifically designed to address organizations like the network we had investigated. The division combines traditional law enforcement methods with intelligence collection capabilities, financial analysis expertise, and international coordination mechanisms that recognize the global nature of modern organized crime. The investigation also highlighted the need for better coordination between law enforcement agencies and regulatory bodies that oversee legitimate businesses and financial institutions. The network's success had been largely due to their ability to exploit gaps between different regulatory systems and jurisdictions. New laws were enacted to address money laundering through legitimate businesses, while international agreements were developed to improve coordination between law. The investigation also demonstrated that the distinction between organized crime and legitimate business was becoming increasingly blurred. The network had successfully infiltrated significant portions of the legitimate economy, creating hybrid enterprises that were simultaneously criminal organizations and legitimate businesses. This evolution poses fundamental challenges for law enforcement agencies that are organized around traditional distinctions between different types of crime. The network had simultaneously engaged in drug trafficking, money laundering, corruption, cybercrime, and legitimate business activities, requiring investigations that crossed multiple jurisdictions and involved dozens of different law enforcement agencies. The individuals arrested during Operation Bloodroots received sentences ranging from several years to life imprisonment. But the network's legacy extends far beyond the criminal prosecutions that followed our investigation. The organizational innovations they developed have been adopted by criminal enterprises worldwide, creating new challenges for law enforcement agencies in every country. The network's approach to corruption using legitimate business relationships and professional opportunities rather than traditional bribery has been particularly influential. Law enforcement agencies worldwide are now seeing evidence of corruption networks that use sophisticated methods to compromise government officials while maintaining plausible deniability. The financial innovations developed by the network have also spread throughout the criminal community. Their methods for converting criminal proceeds into legitimate assets through complex business transactions and investment strategies are now being used by criminal organizations worldwide. But perhaps most concerning is the network's approach to intelligence gathering and counter-surveillance. Their methods for monitoring law enforcement activities and protecting their operations from investigation have been adopted by other criminal organizations, making traditional investigative methods increasingly ineffective. The technology systems developed by the network have become commercially available through front companies and legitimate technology firms that continue to operate despite their criminal origins. These systems are now being used by criminal organizations worldwide, creating a global infrastructure that supports criminal activities while appearing completely legitimate. The network's success in infiltrating legitimate businesses and financial institutions has also created long-term challenges for economic security. The assets they acquired through criminal activities remain in the legitimate economy, creating ongoing opportunities for criminal organizations to influence legitimate markets and corrupt additional institutions. The investigation revealed that modern organized crime had evolved into something far more dangerous than traditional criminal organizations. Instead of operating on the margins of society, these networks had become integrated into the legitimate economy in ways that made them nearly indistinguishable from legal businesses. Throughout our investigation, one aspect remained frustratingly elusive: the network's connections to Mexican cartels and the extent to which they were operating independently or as part of larger criminal organizations. Intelligence gathered during Operation Bloodroots suggested that the network maintained complex relationships with multiple Mexican cartels, serving as both customers and service providers while maintaining operational independence. The relationship was more sophisticated than traditional cartel operations, which typically involve direct control of trafficking routes and distribution networks. Instead, the network appeared to operate as a criminal services company, providing specialized capabilities to multiple cartels while maintaining their own independent operations. Analysis of communications intercepts revealed that the network was providing services including money laundering, logistics coordination, intelligence gathering, and what appeared to be conflict resolution between competing cartels. They had positioned themselves as neutral facilitators who could work with multiple organizations without being controlled by any single cartel. This positioning had allowed them to achieve something that traditional cartel operations had never accomplished: stable long-term operations in American markets without the territorial disputes and violence that typically attracted law enforcement attention. By serving multiple cartels while maintaining independence, they had created a business model that was more sustainable and profitable than traditional trafficking operations. But the Mexican connections also created new challenges for American law enforcement. The network's operations extended deep into Mexico, involving corruption of government officials, military personnel, and law enforcement agencies at all levels. Their intelligence capabilities allowed them to monitor American law enforcement activities from Mexican territory, while their financial resources provided protection from Mexican authorities. The complexity of the cross-border operations required unprecedented cooperation between American and Mexican law enforcement agencies. Traditional mechanisms for international law enforcement cooperation were inadequate for addressing organizations that operated seamlessly across national borders while maintaining sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities. Special Agent Carlos Mendoza, from the FBI's Legal Attaché Office in Mexico City, worked with our task force to coordinate with Mexican authorities. But the network's corruption capabilities made it difficult to identify trustworthy partners within Mexican law enforcement agencies. Every time we shared information with Mexican authorities, the network seemed to know about it within hours, Mendoza explained during a secure briefing. Either they have sources within Mexican law enforcement, or their intelligence capabilities are sophisticated enough to monitor communications between our agencies. The solution required developing new protocols for international cooperation that assumed potential compromise of traditional communication channels. Intelligence sharing was limited to information that could not compromise ongoing operations, while operational coordination was conducted through channels that bypassed potentially compromised Mexican institutions. But even with enhanced security measures, the network's Mexican operations remained largely intact after Operation Bloodroots. Intelligence indicated that they had successfully relocated many operations to Mexican territory, where they continued to provide services to multiple cartels while planning their eventual return to American markets. The Mexican connections also revealed the global scope of the network's operations. Financial records recovered during the raids showed transactions with organizations in Colombia, Guatemala, and other Central American countries, suggesting that the network was part of a larger criminal ecosystem that extended throughout the Western Hemisphere. Intelligence analysis indicated that similar networks were operating in other regions, using comparable organizational structures and operational methods. The network we had investigated was not unique. It was part of a new generation of criminal organizations that were transforming how organized crime operated in the globalized economy. One of the most significant aspects of the network's operations was their sophisticated use of technology to support criminal activities. The technology systems we discovered during Operation Bloodroots were more advanced than those used by many legitimate businesses and government agencies, representing a level of investment and expertise that challenged traditional assumptions about criminal organizations. The network had developed custom software applications for every aspect of their operations, inventory management systems for tracking narcotics through the supply chain, financial management systems for handling money laundering operations, human resources systems for managing personnel across multiple states, and customer relationship management systems for coordinating with distributors and clients. But it was their intelligence and security systems that were most impressive and most concerning for law enforcement. The network had developed sophisticated surveillance capabilities that allowed them to monitor law enforcement activities, track the movements of federal agents, and intercept communications between government agencies. The surveillance systems included traditional methods like physical surveillance and infiltration of law enforcement agencies, but also advanced technological capabilities, including signal interception, computer network penetration, and social media monitoring that provided comprehensive intelligence on law enforcement activities. Dr. Jennifer Park, a cybersecurity expert from the FBI's Cyber Division, analyzed the network's technology systems and concluded that they represented a quantum leap in criminal organization capabilities. These systems are more sophisticated than what most Fortune 500 companies use, Dr. Park explained. The network invested hundreds of millions of dollars in technology development, creating capabilities that rival those of major technology companies and government intelligence agencies. The network's technology development was managed by a team of legitimate computer scientists, software engineers, and cybersecurity experts who appeared to be unaware of the criminal nature of their work. The technology team was managed through front companies that appeared to be legitimate software development firms, providing legal cover for their activities while protecting them from criminal prosecution. The front companies had been successful enough to attract investment from legitimate venture capital firms and had developed some technologies that were sold to legitimate customers, including government agencies. This created the disturbing possibility that law enforcement agencies were using technologies that had been developed by criminal organizations. The network's use of artificial intelligence and machine learning was particularly advanced. They had developed AI systems that could analyze law enforcement communications to identify potential threats, optimize drug distribution routes to minimize detection risks, and manage financial transactions to avoid triggering suspicious activity reports. But perhaps most concerning was evidence that the network had been developing capabilities for cyber attacks against law enforcement and government systems. Computer forensics revealed research into methods for disrupting government communications, manipulating evidence databases, and compromising the security of law enforcement facilities. The cyber capabilities represented a new dimension of threat that law enforcement agencies were not prepared to address. Traditional organized crime investigations focused on physical crimes and financial activities, but this network had developed the capability to attack the technological infrastructure that modern law enforcement depended on. The investigation led to enhanced cybersecurity measures for law enforcement agencies and new protocols for protecting sensitive information from technologically sophisticated criminal organizations. But the network's technological innovations had already spread to other criminal organizations, creating an ongoing threat that would require continuous adaptation by law enforcement agencies. The scope of the network's financial operations became clear only after months of analysis by forensic accountants and financial intelligence specialists. What we discovered was not just a money laundering operation, but a parallel financial system that rivaled legitimate banking institutions in its sophistication and global reach. The network had created their own banking relationships, investment portfolios, and financial instruments that allowed them to move money around the world while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business activities. They had relationships with banks in over 20 countries, investment accounts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and business interests that generated legitimate revenue streams. But the most sophisticated aspect of their financial operations was their use of legitimate businesses as vehicles for money laundering and asset protection. The network had acquired hundreds of businesses across multiple industries, creating a portfolio of assets that generated legitimate income while providing cover for criminal activities. The business acquisitions were carefully selected to provide maximum benefit for criminal operations while maintaining legal protection. They acquired logistics companies that could transport narcotics, financial services firms that could process money, undering transactions, technology companies that could provide security and communication services, and real estate companies that could convert criminal proceeds into legitimate assets. The network's investment strategy was more sophisticated than many legitimate investment firms. They employed professional investment managers, maintained diversified portfolios, and used advanced financial instruments to maximize returns while minimizing risks. Their investment performance had been consistently profitable, generating billions of dollars in legitimate wealth that was protected from criminal asset forfeit. Special Agent Lisa Chen from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division led the effort to trace the network's financial operations and recover criminal assets. What she found challenged traditional approaches to financial investigations and asset recovery. They've created a financial structure that's designed to survive law enforcement action, Jen explained. Even if we can prove that the original source of funds was criminal activity, the money has been converted into legitimate assets through complex business transactions that are protected by commercial law. The network's financial operations had been so successful that they had become major players in legitimate financial markets. Their investment activities were influencing stock prices, real estate markets, and commodity prices in ways that created systemic risks for the broader economy. The investigation revealed that the network's financial activities were generating more revenue than their drug trafficking operations. The legitimate businesses they had acquired were profitable enough to support their criminal activities without requiring income from drug sales, creating a self-sustaining criminal enterprise that could survive indefinitely. But the most disturbing aspect of the financial operations was their integration with legitimate financial institutions. The network had developed relationships with banks, investment firms, and other financial institutions that were providing services without apparent knowledge of the criminal source of funds. The relationships with legitimate financial institutions created legal and practical barriers to investigation and asset recovery. Many of the network's assets were held by institutions that had legitimate business relationships and were protected by banking privacy laws, attorney-client privilege, and other legal protections. The investigation led to new regulations requiring enhanced due diligence by financial institutions when dealing with high-risk customers. But the network's sophisticated methods for concealing the criminal source of funds made detection extremely difficult, even with enhanced scrutiny. Behind the sophisticated organizational structure, advanced technology systems, and complex financial operations was a human cost that was easy to overlook in the technical complexity of the investigation. The network's success had been built on the exploitation and destruction of thousands of lives, from the victims of drug addiction to the communities devastated by their operations. The drug distribution network had flooded American communities with narcotics of unprecedented purity and potency, contributing to overdose deaths, addiction rates, and associated criminal activity that affected millions of Americans. The network's efficiency and market consolidation had made drugs more available and more affordable, dramatically expanding the scope of the addiction crisis. But the human cost extended beyond the direct effects of drug distribution. The network's operations had corrupted government institutions, legitimate businesses, and community organizations in ways that undermined public trust and social cohesion. Their influence had spread through communities like a virus, corrupting everything they touched. The corruption networks had compromised law enforcement agencies, judicial institutions, and government agencies at all levels, creating cynicism about the integrity of public institutions that would persist long after the network was dismantled. Communities where the network had operated extensively would struggle for years to rebuild trust in government and law enforcement. The network's infiltration of legitimate businesses had also created long-term economic damage. Businesses that had been acquired or influenced, the network had been sophisticated in their recruitment methods, identifying vulnerable individuals and providing them with opportunities for education, employment, and advancement that were often better than legitimate alternatives. Many of the network's employees had been recruited as teenagers or young adults who were attracted by the economic opportunities and professional development that the organization provided. The network had invested heavily in training and education for their employees, creating genuine career advancement opportunities that were more attractive than many legitimate employers could offer. The result was that many of the individuals arrested during Operation Bloodroots were not career criminals, but rather young people who had been recruited into what appeared to be legitimate business opportunities. Their prosecutions raised difficult questions about criminal justice and the social conditions that made criminal organizations attractive to vulnerable populations. The scope and sophistication of the network revealed by Operation Bloodroots had implications that extended far beyond American law enforcement. The organizational methods, technology systems, and operational techniques developed by the network were being adopted by criminal organizations worldwide, creating new challenges for law enforcement agencies in every country. The international response required unprecedented cooperation between law enforcement agencies, intelligence services, and regulatory bodies across multiple countries. Traditional mechanisms for international law enforcement cooperation were inadequate for addressing organizations that operated seamlessly across national borders while maintaining sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities. Interpol established a new task force specifically designed to address transnational criminal enterprises that operated using the organizational model developed by the network. The task force included representatives from law enforcement agencies in over 30 countries, as well as specialists in financial crimes, cybercrime, and intelligence analysis. But international cooperation was complicated by the network's sophisticated corruption capabilities and their success in compromising government institutions in multiple countries. Information sharing required new security protocols that assumed potential compromise of traditional communication channels, while operational coordination required mechanisms that could function despite corruption of local law enforcement agencies. The European Union established new regulations for financial institutions and businesses designed to prevent the infiltration of criminal organizations into legitimate commerce. The regulations required enhanced due diligence for high-risk transactions, improved reporting of suspicious activities, and better coordination between regulatory agencies in different countries. Similar measures were adopted by other international organizations. But the network's sophisticated methods for concealing criminal activities made detection extremely difficult, even with enhanced scrutiny. The network's success had demonstrated that traditional regulatory approaches were inadequate for addressing modern criminal organizations. The technology innovations developed by the network posed particularly complex challenges for international law enforcement cooperation. The network's systems for encrypted communications, anonymous financial transactions, and sophisticated surveillance were being sold to criminal organizations worldwide through front companies and legitimate technology firms. International efforts to control the spread of criminal technology were complicated by the dual-use nature of many systems that had legitimate applications as well as criminal uses. Encryption technology that could protect criminal communications could also protect legitimate privacy rights, while surveillance systems that could support criminal activities could also enhance legitimate security operations. The financial innovations developed by the network created similar challenges for international regulatory cooperation. The sophisticated methods for converting criminal proceeds into legitimate assets through complex business transactions were being adopted by criminal organizations worldwide, requiring new approaches to asset recovery and financial regulation. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was the recognition that organized crime had evolved into a global phenomenon that required coordinated international responses. The network we had investigated was not an American problem. It was part of a transformation in organized crime that was affecting every country in the world. During our extensive investigation of the Bloodroots network, one aspect that particularly stood out for its sophistication was their manipulation of legitimate port operations in Houston, Texas. This case study deserves detailed examination, as it reveals how modern criminal organizations exploit legitimate infrastructure. The Houston Ship Channel, one of the busiest ports in the United States, processed over 200 million tons of cargo annually, making it an ideal location for concealing criminal shipments within the massive flow of legitimate commerce. The network's Houston operations were managed by someone identified in intercepted communications as the harbor master, who appeared to have extensive experience in maritime logistics and customs operations. Intelligence analysis suggested this individual was a former U.S. Customs and Border Protection official who had been recruited by the network after retiring from federal service. The sophistication of the Houston operations was revealed through analysis of shipping documents recovered during Operation Blood Routes. The network had not simply hidden narcotics in legitimate cargo containers. They had created an entire parallel shipping industry that processed criminal cargo using the same professional standards and documentation as legitimate international trade. The network maintained relationships with over 20 legitimate shipping companies, port facility operators, customs brokers, and transportation companies. These relationships were carefully cultivated over years, involving significant financial investments and the gradual compromise of key personnel through a combination of corruption, blackmail, and legitimate business partnerships. The corruption of port operations was particularly sophisticated because it involved multiple layers of security and oversight. The network had to compromise customs officials who inspected incoming cargo, port security personnel who controlled access to facilities, transportation companies that moved containers from the port to distribution centers, and administrative personnel who processed shipping documentation. But rather than relying on crude bribery, the network used sophisticated methods that created ongoing relationships with compromised officials. They established legitimate businesses that provided services to port operations, creating opportunities for regular contact and the gradual expansion of corrupt relationships. The network's front companies included customs brokerage firms that processed import documentation, transportation companies that moved cargo from ports to inland destinations, warehousing companies that provided temporary storage for imported goods, and security companies that provided services to port facilities. These legitimate businesses generated significant revenue while providing cover for criminal activities. The customs brokerage firms processed thousands of legitimate shipments annually, while occasionally handling criminal cargo. The transportation companies moved legitimate goods for hundreds of clients, while providing specialized services for criminal shipments. The warehousing operations were particularly sophisticated because they provided opportunities for modifying cargo after it had cleared customs, but before it reached final destinations. Criminal shipments could be processed through legitimate warehouses, where narcotics could be extracted from concealment, repackaged for distribution, and combined with legitimate goods to create mixed shipments that were nearly impossible to detect. Analysis of the Houston operations revealed that the network was processing over 500 million worth of narcotics annually through the port, generating sufficient revenue to support their entire national operation. The volume was substantial enough to affect regional drug markets across the southern United States, while remaining virtually invisible within the massive flow of legitimate commerce. The investigation also revealed that the Houston operations were serving other criminal organizations in addition to the network's own trafficking activities. This positioning had allowed them to achieve unprecedented influence within the international drug trade, while avoiding the territorial conflicts that typically characterized cartel operations. By serving multiple organizations while maintaining neutrality, they had created a business model that was more stable and profitable than traditional trafficking operations. The Houston operations also provided insights into the network's international connections and the global scope of their activities. Shipping records showed connections to criminal organizations in Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, and several Asian countries, suggesting that the network was part of a global criminal ecosystem that extended far beyond North American drug trafficking, beyond the physical operations. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of our investigation was uncovering the network's technological capabilities. The Bloodroots organization had developed systems that rivaled major corporations and government agencies. The technological sophistication of the Bloodroots network represented a quantum leap in criminal organization capabilities that had implications extending far beyond drug trafficking. The systems they developed provided a template for criminal organizations worldwide and created new challenges for law enforcement agencies that were unprepared for technologically sophisticated adversaries. The network's technology infrastructure was built around a distributed computing system that provided redundancy, security, and scalability that rivaled major technology companies. The system included data centers in multiple states, satellite communication capabilities, and redundant internet connections that ensured continuous operations even if individual components were compromised. The security architecture was particularly impressive, incorporating multiple layers of protection, including military-grade encryption, sophisticated access controls, and counter-surveillance capabilities that could detect and respond to law enforcement monitoring attempts. The system was designed to assume potential compromise and included protocols for isolating compromised components while maintaining overall system integrity. The network had developed custom software applications for every aspect of their operations, but the applications were designed to appear as legitimate business software that could withstand casual inspection by law enforcement personnel. The inventory management system appeared to be designed for managing legitimate retail operations while actually tracking narcotics shipments through complex distribution networks. The financial management system appeared to be a standard accounting package for international business operations, while actually managing sophisticated money laundering transactions that converted criminal proceeds into legitimate assets through complex business relationships and investment strategies. The customer relationship management system appeared to be designed for managing sales relationships with legitimate business clients while actually coordinating distribution networks that included thousands of dealers across multiple states and managing relationships with criminal organizations throughout North America. But the most sophisticated aspect of the technology infrastructure was the artificial intelligence system that managed risk assessment, threat detection, and operational optimization across the entire network. The AI system analyzed vast amounts of data from multiple sources to identify patterns that might indicate law enforcement attention, optimize distribution routes to minimize detection risks, and coordinate activities across multiple cells to maximize efficiency while maintaining security. The AI system incorporated machine learning algorithms that allowed it to adapt to changing law enforcement tactics and continuously improve its effectiveness. The system learned from successful operations to identify best practices, analyzed failed operations to identify vulnerabilities, and incorporated new information to improve future performance. The system also included predictive capabilities that allowed the network to anticipate law enforcement activities and adjust operations accordingly. The system analyzed patterns in law enforcement communications, surveillance activities, and arrest patterns to predict when and where law enforcement operations might occur. This predictive capability gave the network significant advantages in avoiding law enforcement attention and maintaining operational security. They could adjust operations in response to increased law enforcement activity, relocate facilities before raids occurred, and modify communication patterns to avoid surveillance. The network's technology infrastructure also included sophisticated surveillance capabilities that allowed them to monitor law enforcement activities and gather intelligence on potential threats. The surveillance systems included traditional methods like physical surveillance and communication intercepts, but also advanced capabilities including social media monitoring, public records analysis, and network penetration that provided comprehensive intelligence on law enforcement activities. The intelligence gathering capabilities were coordinated through a centralized analysis center that processed information from multiple sources and provided actionable intelligence to operational cells throughout the network. The analysis center employed professional intelligence analysts who had been recruited from legitimate intelligence agencies and private sector intelligence firms. The network's investment in technology development was substantial, with estimates suggesting they spent over $100 million annually on technology systems, personnel, and research and development. This investment level allowed them to develop capabilities that exceeded those available to many law enforcement agencies and gave them significant operational advantages. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Bloodroots network was their sophisticated approach to recruiting and managing personnel, which operated more like a legitimate multinational corporation than a traditional criminal organization. This systematic approach to human resources was perhaps their greatest innovation and most dangerous legacy. The network had developed human resources policies, employee benefits programs, and career development opportunities that were often superior to those offered by legitimate employers. Their recruitment strategy was not focused on finding criminals, but rather on identifying and converting talented professionals who could contribute specialized skills to their operations. The recruitment process was carefully designed to identify individuals with specific skills and characteristics that would be valuable to the network's operations. Rather than recruiting from traditional criminal populations, the network focused on professionals from legitimate industries who possessed technical skills, industry knowledge, or institutional access that could benefit their operations. The network maintained recruitment operations on college campuses, focusing on students in business, engineering, computer science, and criminal justice programs. They offered internships, scholarships, and job opportunities that appeared to be legitimate career advancement opportunities, while gradually introducing selected individuals to the network's criminal activities. The campus recruitment operations were managed through front companies that appeared to be legitimate businesses offering career opportunities in international trade, logistics, financial services, and technology. Students who accepted positions with these companies often worked for months or years on apparently legitimate projects before being introduced to the criminal aspects of the network's operations. The gradual introduction process was designed to compromise individuals slowly, making it difficult for them to extricate themselves once they realized the criminal nature of their employment. By the time employees understood they were working for a criminal organization, they had often committed actions that made them vulnerable to criminal prosecution, creating powerful incentives for continued cooperation. The network also recruited extensively from government agencies, focusing on employees with access to sensitive information or decision-making authority. The recruitment process for government employees was particularly sophisticated, involving long-term relationship building, gradual compromise, and the creation of ongoing obligations that ensured continued cooperation. Rather than simply offering bribes, the network created legitimate business opportunities, romantic relationships, and social connections that gradually drew government employees into compromising situations. The process often took years and created relationships that appeared entirely legitimate, while serving the network's intelligence and operational needs. The network's employee benefits programs were genuinely attractive and included health insurance, retirement plans, educational opportunities, and even legal defense funds for employees who were arrested in connection with network activities. These benefits created genuine loyalty among employees and made the network competitive with legitimate employers in attracting and retaining talented personnel. The career development programs offered by the network were often superior to those available in legitimate organizations. Employees received professional training, educational opportunities, and advancement prospects that were carefully designed to develop their skills while increasing their value to the network's operations. The network maintained training facilities that appeared to be legitimate corporate education centers, but actually provided specialized training in areas including financial analysis, logistics management, international law, and counter-surveillance techniques. The training programs were professional enough that certificates and credentials earned through network programs were accepted by legitimate employers and educational institutions. The performance management systems used by the network were sophisticated enough to rival those used by major corporations. Employees received regular performance reviews, goal-setting sessions, and feedback that helped them develop professionally while ensuring their activities aligned with the network's objectives. The network also maintained employee assistance programs that provided counseling, legal assistance, and other services to employees and their families. These programs created genuine value for employees while ensuring their continued loyalty and cooperation with the network's activities. But perhaps most concerning was the network's success in creating a corporate culture that made employees genuinely proud of their work and loyal to the organization. Many employees appeared to view themselves as professionals working for a successful international business, rather than criminals involved in drug trafficking and money laundering. This corporate culture was carefully cultivated through company communications, social events, and recognition programs that emphasize the network's success, professionalism, and importance. Employees were encouraged to view their work as contributing to a larger mission that transcended traditional moral and legal boundaries. The success of the network's human resources operations created significant challenges for law enforcement agencies. Many of the individuals arrested during Operation Bloodrouts were not career criminals, but rather professionals who had been gradually drawn into criminal activities through sophisticated recruitment and management processes. The prosecutions that followed Operation Bloodrouts raised difficult questions about criminal responsibility when individuals had been systematically manipulated and compromised over extended periods. Many defendants had legitimate professional backgrounds and appeared to be victims of sophisticated manipulation as much as willing participants in criminal activities. The global financial operations of the Bloodrouts network represented one of the most sophisticated money laundering systems ever documented by law enforcement, involving financial institutions, businesses, and government agencies in over 30 countries. This final chapter of our investigation revealed the true scope of their financial empire. The system was designed not just to conceal the criminal source of funds, but to generate legitimate wealth that could support ongoing criminal activities while appearing completely legal. What we discovered challenged every assumption about how criminal organizations manage their finances. The foundation of the international money laundering system was a network of shell companies and offshore entities that provided layers of legal protection while obscuring the true ownership and control of assets. The network had established hundreds of companies and jurisdictions known for financial privacy and minimal regulatory oversight, creating a maze of corporate relationships that made tracing funds nearly impossible. But the network's approach to money laundering went far beyond traditional offshore banking and shell company structures. They had created sophisticated business relationships that generated legitimate economic activity while processing criminal proceeds, making their money laundering operations nearly indistinguishable from legal international commerce. The network operated import-export businesses that conducted legitimate trade in various commodities while manipulating prices, quantities, and financial terms to transfer criminal proceeds between countries. Over-invoicing for exports and under-invoicing for imports allowed the network to move money internationally while creating documentation that appeared to reflect legitimate business transactions. The commodity trading operations were particularly sophisticated because they involved actual physical goods that provided tangible evidence of legitimate business activities. The network traded in agricultural products, manufactured goods, raw materials, and luxury items, creating diverse revenue streams that made their financial activities appear to be the result of successful business operations. The network also operated legitimate financial services businesses that provided investment management, currency exchange, and banking services to legitimate clients while processing criminal proceeds for the network and other criminal organizations. These businesses were profitable enough to generate substantial legitimate income while providing perfect cover for money laundering activities. The investment management operations were particularly impressive because they generated genuine returns for both legitimate clients and criminal proceeds, creating wealth that was legally protected regardless of its original source. The network employed professional investment managers who appeared to be unaware of the criminal source of some of the funds they were managing. The currency exchange operations provided opportunities for converting criminal proceeds between different currencies while creating documentation that appeared to reflect the legitimate foreign exchange transactions. The network operated currency exchange businesses in multiple countries, allowing them to move money internationally while maintaining the appearance of normal commercial activities. The banking relationships maintained by the network included accounts at major financial institutions in dozens of countries, providing access to international financial systems while maintaining the legal protections associated with legitimate banking relationships. The network's sophisticated approach to compliance and documentation meant that their banking activities rarely triggered suspicious activity reports or regulatory scrutiny. The network had also developed relationships with legitimate investment banks, venture capital firms, and private equity companies that provided opportunities for converting criminal proceeds into equity investments in legitimate businesses. These investments generated ongoing revenue streams while creating assets that were legally protected from criminal asset forfeit. The real estate investments made by the network were particularly sophisticated because they involved properties in multiple countries that could be used for operational purposes while appreciating in value and providing opportunities for additional money laundering. Through construction projects, property management activities, and real estate development ventures. The network's investment in legitimate businesses created ongoing revenue streams that reduced their dependence on criminal activities while providing additional opportunities for money laundering. The businesses they acquired often became more profitable under network management, generating genuine economic value while serving criminal purposes. The professional services network maintained by the criminal organization included relationships with attorneys, accountants, consultants, and other professionals who provided services that created additional layers of legal protection while facilitating money laundering activities. Many of these professionals appeared to be unaware of the criminal nature of their clients' activities. The legal services network was particularly important because it provided access to attorney-client privilege and other legal protections that shielded criminal activities from law enforcement scrutiny. The network maintained relationships with law firms in multiple countries, ensuring access to legal expertise in various jurisdictions and practice areas. The accounting services network provided opportunities for creating sophisticated financial structures and documentation that made criminal proceeds appear to be the result of legitimate business activities. The network employed professional accountants who were skilled in international tax law and complex business transactions. The success of the international money laundering operations was measured not just by the amount of money processed, but by the network's ability to create genuine wealth that could support ongoing operations, regardless of the success or failure of their criminal activities. The legitimate assets created through money laundering operations provided financial stability and long-term sustainability that allowed the network to survive law enforcement, pressure, and continue operations even when specific criminal activities were disrupted. In the end, the Bloodroots network had achieved something unprecedented in the history of organized crime. They had created a criminal enterprise that was virtually indistinguishable from legitimate international business. Their success represented a fundamental evolution in organized crime that would challenge law enforcement agencies for decades to come. The investigation had revealed not just a criminal organization, but a preview of the future of organized crime in a globalized world. The methods they developed, the relationships they built, and the systems they created would serve as templates for criminal organizations worldwide, ensuring that their legacy would persist long after their leaders were imprisoned and their operations dismantled. As I concluded my